an
intimidating.
obedient audience.
Well, this is very impressive to have all of you here and in your chairs and to be able to start on time. We're probably setting a record for public meetings, but thank you for that. I am Pam Marsh. I have the pleasure to welcome you here this morning. We have an incredible lineup of information for you today. My job is largely going to be to help with the logistics of the morning, to move one panel off and introduce the next panel. Again, we have 4 panels lined up, so we're going to have a lot of information thrown at you in a very short period of time. We want to start today, I think, with just a word about context. How is it that we are all here in this room at Southern Oregon University on a sunny Saturday morning? No question, it has been a dispiriting summer here in Southern Oregon. A month's worth of severe smoke conditions resulted in a loss to our economy. We worried about our personal and community health status. We walked down sidewalks trying to identify each other behind the masks we wore to try to deflect smoke from our lungs. It was depressing and it was scary. We began to wonder about the future of our community. Perhaps you saw the cover page of the Mail Tribune this August 15th. The top headline, "Wildfire Fight is Far From Over," described conditions on the ground created when we have a forest that is terribly vulnerable to fire. The article in the right column, "Scientists Predict Warmer 5 Years," warned us that the weather patterns that feed fire will probably be even worse in the future. Described in the article, the statement was that we can expect anomalously warm conditions even beyond what climate forecasts have predicted. Now, nothing about this situation is easy, although today we should be very glad that we don't have hurricanes in our community. Still, we are a tough bunch, and this morning we come together as a community to try to understand the multiple issues involved in smoke and fire, and to begin the process of identifying pragmatic steps forward that can keep our community safer and help us figure out how to become more resilient even in the face of difficult conditions. This morning is the beginning of many discussions to come in the months ahead. So finally, I'd just like to add a few thanks and a word about this morning's logistics. As you can see, we have a lot of information to share in a short time. We are nothing if not optimists here today. We have 4 panels, and we are going to move as quickly as we can from one to the next. We have not scheduled a formal break in the morning. So please feel free to get up and move around whenever you need to. Between each panel, we'll have a couple of minutes of transition where you can stand up and stretch and maybe run to the bathroom. But do feel free to move around whenever you need to. And because we have so much to share, we are not going to take audience questions during the presentations. Instead, we will invite you to stay after the formal presentations are over at the end of the morning to engage with each other in informal discussion. And finally, a few thanks. In addition to our phenomenal panel members, who you will see up here this morning, I want to acknowledge Deanne Everson, Joe Vail, Bella Manray, Marco Bay, Hannah Soul, and Kate Jackson for help today and for consultation as we put the event together. Thank you to SOU for place and logistics, and to RVTV for ensuring that we'll be able to share today with others who cannot be here this morning. A special call out to Paige Pruitt, who handled the logistics of this gathering, put together in a very short period of time, so there were lots of logistics, and to Green Springs Inn and Cabins, who provided accommodations for several of our panelists. So thank you. Lots of good information ahead. And we are going to kick off this morning's discussion around the question of our forests. We understand that we have forests that for a variety of reasons are particularly vulnerable. We need to understand why that's happened and what we may be able to do about it. And now I would like to introduce Don Ferguson. Don is a retired BLM Natural Resources Staff Administrator. He worked for the U.S. Forest Service in Washington and Oregon from 1969 until joining the Medford District Bureau of Land Management in 1981. He is retired from the BLM in 2006, but remains active in managing large fires throughout the U.S. In fact, he just came off a fire about 4 days ago, where he worked all summer. His current focus is managing the public information needs generated by large fires, hurricanes, and other large-scale emergencies. And Don will serve as our moderator for the forest management panel today. Don.
Thank you. Good morning. I've known Marco quite a while, and I just met the other two panelists, and I'd really quickly introduce you to them so we can hear from them. Dr. Christopher Dunn is a research associate in the College of Forestry at Oregon State University. He spent 8 years in fire suppression and fuels management prior to pursuing research on contemporary fire effects and ecosystem response to mixed severity fires. His current research focuses on the safety and effectiveness of large fire management. He leverages his operational experience and research training to bridge the gap between science and management and to better prepare land and fire managers for the changing fire environment. Does that sound like you? Okay.
Pretty nice.
Next to him, Mark Webb is the Executive Director for Blue Mountains Forest Partners, a diverse group of stakeholders who utilize best available science and work collaboratively to increase the pace and scale of restoration on the Malheur National Forest. Prior to this, he served as Grant County Judge, taught at Eastern Oregon University, and worked in natural resource-related jobs across Eastern Oregon. Mark believes that strong, vibrant communities and healthy landscapes are inseparably linked. I really look forward to hearing him. And Marco Bay is the co-founder and executive director of Lomakatsi Restoration Project, which develops and implements forest and watershed restoration programs and initiatives throughout Oregon and Northern California, working with federal and state agencies, tribal governments, industry, and other nonprofit organizations. And Marco also serves as the board president of the Northwest Forest Worker Center and board member of Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative. So we will hear from them, starting with Chris, please.
Thanks, Don. So just so everybody knows, I have a bad cough, so maybe it's appropriate for this type of summit on smoke. So if I go into a fit, just bear with me, I'll get over it. And if I pass out, bear with me, I'll get back up. I was asked to come and talk about sort of the history and how we got to today's, I guess, fire environment is how I would put it. And so I'm going to go through some history and then end with where I think we stand today. We're really stuck between two paradigms. Before the colonization of the West by the Euro-Americans, the Native Americans had their relationship, right? So they had a relationship with fire, with force, that was fundamentally different than what we have today, and it's essentially what we've imposed on the landscape. And it really is important to understand that this is a linkage between society and the forest. We drive the conditions of the forest, and a lot of that is through fire and through our interactions with fire, whether it's through fire use or the suppression of fire. And so we're stuck between these two paradigms, one of suppression and one of sort of living with fire and utilizing it to its great advantage for farming, hunting, and that sort, which is what the Native Americans' perspective were. So how did this change happen? Well, somewhere in 1891, we had the Forest Reserves Act, right? And this really started to establish where we were taking some of the land out, it was really out in the public domain, into forest reserves at the time, which is now the Forest Service, so National Forest Lands and ultimately the Forest Service. It was the General Land Office at the time. And the Forest Service established in 1905, and they were really afraid of a timber famine and worried about that coming out of the Midwest. Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot. Displayed here in this image, of course. And there was debate about the merits of that. Should we have lands in public ownership, or should they remain in private? And so the Forest Service largely remained underfunded. That is until the Big Burn of 1910 or the Great Fires of 1910. Right? And so we saw fires all across the West, not just Idaho and Montana, although they get the main storyline. We think of Idaho and Montana as the main impetus, and you can see that because of that large blob of fire that precipitated up there in the panhandle Idaho, 3 million acres burned up there, 88 firefighters died, right? So this was what Gifford Pinchot saw an opportunity to lobby Congress and the federal government for additional funding to give purpose to the Forest Service at this time. It was a local disaster. There was lots of death and loss of private properties, homes, whole towns evacuated. Timothy Egan wrote a great book about this, and so did Stephen Pine, and maybe many of you have read that. But despite being a local disaster, Gifford Pinchot leveraged it as a national success at the time, and that really precipitated the 1911 Weeks Act, that fostered the state fire programs with federal funds. So we really started ramping up fire suppression as how we were going to proceed into the future. And it really was a direct political response to those large fires, those 1910 fires. Now, it wasn't without debate either. 1910, in our esteemed Sunset magazine of the Pacific Northwest, this debate really played out in the literature. And it was really focused in Sunset magazine into the 20s. But back even at 1910, when those suppression policies were being pursued, many of the practitioners out in the West were saying, wait a minute, I think we want to continue this light burning policy or program policy interaction that the Native Americans had here in an effort to protect the actual timber base, the wet forest lands here in the, obviously in the Northwest. And that debate raged on into the 20s. Now we're already entering into this fire suppression paradigm, but people are still pushing, and in particular the timber industry was pushing for more light burning in the dry forest, the pine forest as they called it, as an effort to protect both their homes and to protect the timber resources in the wet forests that burn less frequently. And so at that time it was really, the timber industry was a proponent of more fire. So the debate raged on. They decided they're going to take a look at it, had some summits. Forest Service chiefs were still out there actively lobbying for fire suppression. It really bolstered and built the Forest Service. And so here William Greeley is writing in The Timberman about the fallacy of light burning, or Paiute forestry as he called it at the time. And you can see we're still having very similar debates, although maybe the positions of people have switched. Well, fire exclusion won, despite forest industry wanting it. Thank you. Forest Service fights against it, and they had a light burning committee, and ultimately suppression, the suppression paradigm really dominated after that. Within, say, 23 years, so this was published in 1943 in the Journal of Forestry, and there's an image on the bottom showing the same stand from 1909 and 1948. Within 20 to 40 years, we already started to see the consequences of this transition from one fire sort of management paradigm to the new, right? So now we've been in this state that we see that occurred in 1940s all the way through to today, and we're still largely in that effort. And of course, we've modified the forest in other ways through timber management and that sort. And so today we have this increasingly complex wildfire environment. So we've altered the forest structure, increased fuel loadings. That happened because we were suppressing fires, allowed the forest to densify. We've also, of course, had a large timber management program, especially here in Oregon, Washington, or the West, and that modified the forest structure as well. And then with that, we've seen this massive expansion of the wildland-urban interface. ASHLAND being one of those, but many communities around the West reside in that sort of situation. And we continue to expand and grow out into that. And that puts us at the forefront of this altered forest environment. And of course, that continues to influence how the forest is managed, or fire is managed as well. There's a significant influence there. And then with that came climate change. So while we were going through this suppression paradigm from about 1948, 49 to mid-80s, 84, 85, there was really a cool and wet summer periods here in the Northwest. So you can see it in the climate records, not just looking back through deep climate history, but recent climate history where we have actual data. You can see that fundamentally our summers were wetter and they were cooler than they are even in the 80s, and of course certainly then today with climate change exacerbating that. And so we sort of built our expectations off of that climate paradigm. What we could do, how we can manage our forests, how we can interact with our forests was built off of this cooler, wetter climate period, and we have certainly come out of that, and climate change projects that to to be much worse and certainly exacerbate the conditions that we see today. And now we're stuck in this sort of wildfire paradox, right? So suppression got us, or at least contributed in part to the conditions we see on the landscape. But because the conditions are so severe and the destruction that comes with communities and some of our ecosystems, there's this real impetus to continue suppression, right? So we're in this paradox. The problem is now the solution, which is also the problem, and we're sort of stuck cycling in this. But new paradigms are emerging. There's a lot of discussions, including this one, that are coming. Must have been a hot day for him or her. So we're really after, there's this discussion about expending, what I say, more of the right kind of fire, the right place, the right time for the right reasons, right? And we really want to foster resilience of both our communities and our ecosystems to fire and to climate change, right? So these are sort of symbiotic and need to move forward together. And the National Cohesive Strategy really harnessed this and grabbed this and believes in this. And it's really an all lands, all hands approach. So it's not just federal agencies, it's state agencies, it's communities, it's everybody trying to come together and really resolve this issue. And ultimately with this vision of learning to live with wildland fire in some fashion. It's inevitable. We're not going to exclude it permanently. We can moderate some of its effects, including its effects on smoke. And what they really are saying is we need resilient communities or fire-adapted communities. We need a safe and effective wildfire response, and we need resilient ecosystems. And you can turn that into this, back to this perspective of the social ecological system. We see we're talking about communities, ecosystems, and response, and that's really these three interacting subsystems in this social ecological system that need to adapt and move forward to some new paradigm. And that is the social system, we need to adapt the ecological system, and we need to adapt our fire management system. And that's where I reside mostly today, is focused on that fire management system and what we can do to make those efforts more efficient and more effective. But of course, I'm part of the ecological system. The social system is a little bit outside of my realm of research and perspective, but it's really about adapting communities and their homes to be resilient to wildfire. And we're at a stage that we're probably behind today because of the immensity of the problem, that it's going to take a long time to unravel it. We have to first get past the conflict that we're at right today and just the debate as to whether we need to do something at all or not. But it really is just about our future. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris, for letting me use your mic. And Mark, can we hear from you, please?
Yes. So first, I hate to do this, but an apology. I'm liable to break down, maybe tear up a little bit. I'm liable to break down and tear up a little bit. This issue is really important to me. So from West Texas, we're not supposed to show tears, but I probably will. So I think notably, Chris ended on the word conflict, and that characterizes Grant County. If I had a slideshow, there would be 3 slides. One would be trench warfare, where industry is shooting at the environmental community, and the enviros are shooting back. Unfortunately, they were a little bit smarter when it came to legislation, so we didn't get ahead. Next slide is a truce of sorts, and then the last slide is we're actually working together pretty well. And so what I'm going to talk about is how we got there, its process. And my experience, my conviction is that this is a lot about social relationships, informing civic disagreement, and maturing that conversation. So that's what we went through, and that's what I want to try to communicate with you. So first, some history. Grant County, a large county geographically, small population-wise. There's probably almost as many people in here today as we have in the county. But we are resource dependent. Logging and ranching are our heritage, and we still depend on it. We don't have very many other options. It's pretty critical to us. Over 60% of Grant County is federally owned and managed. And how they manage that is critically important for our socioeconomic opportunities. It limits them or it opens them up. And so again, it's really important for us what happens on public lands. By the late 80s, we'd been logging Grant County since before the turn of the century by the late 80s. It is a fire-adapted landscape. Chris did an excellent job showing probably what it was like before. As a result of management practices and interest, for example, commercial interest, management practices, both entirely legitimate. It's appropriate to get commercial value out of timber. The management practices that were implemented made the best of sense at the time, really pretty good. But as a result of that, there were significant departures in the type of species that we saw in the landscape, the density of trees that were now in the landscape, as well as the structure on the landscape. And those are all important to what Chris was talking about in terms of landscapes now that are much more prone to catastrophic fires, which were pretty unusual in the past, at least for a lot of Oregon. And again, just something I want to stress from our perspective, fire suppression for a lot of folks makes a lot of sense. We want to save our house because it means a lot, it's commercially valuable, has value to it. Same for timber. So again, while fire suppression may not have been the smartest choice long term, it made a lot of sense at the time, and I want to come back to that in a bit. So by the late 90s, early 2000s, the spotted owl had really shut down pretty heavy timber activity on the west side. Industry had shifted east side. Our timber harvest levels ticked up pretty significantly. A lot more logging going on. The environmental community also took more interest in that, particularly as we started to harvest some big salvage sales. And by the early 2000s, they had effectively shut down active management on the Malheur National Forest, and active management there amounted to logging. So they had shut down our industries, and we were pretty desperate. But interestingly enough, by the mid-2000s, 2003, 4, or 5, the environmental community became alarmed that they were beginning to lose the old-growth trees that they'd saved from the loggers to catastrophic wildfire, to natural wildfire. The loggers were pretty desperate to get any wood, and again, I just want to stress, I'm talking about process and people who couldn't stand one another coming together to have more mature conversations. And so these are not groups that you get in a room very easily, and some of those early conversations that we had, industry would be on this side, the environmental community would be in the back, and we had to have a neutral facilitator to sort of say, well, so-and-so said this, walk across the room, talk to them back and forth. I mean, it was that kind of animosity, and you can really appreciate it because there are serious and significant vested interest across the board, all of them legitimate, really. So we started that conversation, and I'll say that was a painful process. I personally stepped away from it 3 times, getting frustrated or infuriated, those crazy environmentalists, and I mean, I'm not being fair to them, but that's how I felt at the time. And they could say the same thing about industry or community sort of oriented perspectives. But we started that long, painful process, and it was about developing relationships to where we could have hard conversations with people we disagreed about or disagreed with. And it took humility. We had to admit, all of the parties had to admit that we had gotten some things wrong. And you can realize that that opens up an element of vulnerability that's really important for having fruitful conversations. We had to increase our understanding of one another. You know, loggers and environmentalists could go out and they could say, we really value the environment, but what that value meant didn't mean the same thing to the group. So we had to gain that understanding, see where people were coming from. And all of that was a precondition for trust. We weren't going to take any risk with one another until we began to trust one another, that you understood us, that you heard us. Didn't mean that you agreed with us, but you knew where we were coming from. And as we did that, we were able to start asking, well, how do we move forward? Instead of trying to blame people or management practice or things that happened in the past, how do we move forward from the situation we're in right now? And that's where we got to. We were willing to engage risk across the board. That required a shared decision space. We all agreed that we were beginning to trust one another, we were willing to risk one another, things with one another, but we needed a shared decision space, and that's where best available science came in for us. We needed that to provide the sideboards, and again, this is something that Chris and others that he works with have provided for us. Science didn't necessarily answer the questions we had, but it provided that framework to where industry and environmentalists could ask, Well, if this is what the landscape needs, how do I accommodate my interest and my values to meeting that landscape need? For industry, that might mean retooling how they go about timber harvest. For the environmental community, that might mean we're going to actually support more active harvest, something in principle we were opposed to in the past. So those are the ways in which that happened. And so with that shared decision space, with increased relational maturity, I'd say, we were able to have the hard conversations. And I think the last thing I want to share about process is that we began to ask, maybe not always consciously, what does the landscape need? And I don't say that, so some folks in industry might say that's a green question, you know, too environmentalist centric. But when you've taken from the landscape for over 100 years, you still depend on it, it makes a lot of sense. Well, what would a healthy landscape look like? Not how many board feet can I get off per acre because this is what I need to make a living, or how much can I set aside because I don't like active management in certain places and I don't want to see any footprint from people. You ask, what does the landscape need after 100 years of active management? When we could do that, and we can start to accommodate our interest to that, then we can have the conversations whereby we can start to provide the solutions and make a difference both for the landscape and the communities that depend on those landscapes. And so that's for us why I say it's very much a social process about developing relationships, mature relationships, to have hard conversations. We don't care so much about what happened in the past, we care about what's going on in the future, and those are preconditions for having a healthy conversation. So that's Blue Mountains Forest Partners. It was much more colorful in the actual process. I embarrassed myself a lot of times, but yeah, I think that's been our experience, and I think in terms of this wildfire issue, smoke, health, community, that's the approach that our experience suggests is needed to really resolve this and move forward in ways that are going to make a difference across the board in an integrated fashion.
Okay, he's queuing me up. Good morning. I will congratulate us. We're almost there. The fire season's not quite over, but we've made it through a pretty rough summer. It was a challenging one. I'm going to share some examples of potential opportunities, build on years of work and collaborative process, kind of build on what Chris and Mark had talked about, especially around collaboration and a community coming together to address really complex issues. The Rogue Forest Restoration Initiative. So I'll skip that one. I'll start out with our partners over here at the table, Darren Borges and Terry Fairbanks and George McKinley. If you have questions after I complete my presentation about the Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative's Rogue Basin Cohesive Forest Restoration Strategy, we feel it's a vehicle and a tool to go forward and actually put some solutions on the ground to care for our forests and restore that resilience. So resilience and adaptation are really the two words that come to mind for our forests, for our ecosystems, and our communities. So within the Rogue Basin, we've identified about 2.1 million acres that are overly dense in need of restorative treatments. And we're going to talk about 1.1 million acres that we can invest in those efforts in very strategic, ecologically focused approaches to restore the landscape. You can see on this map with some of the work done by the Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy and some of the efforts. If you look at the Rogue Basin, we are in a dry forest system, fire-adapted ecosystem, frequent fire system. Fire will continue to come. How do we learn to adapt and live with fire and manage fire and restore these lands so fire can come back in a healthy way? I think about the year I moved here in 1987 was the 87 fires. This is a photograph from Happy Camp, California, where I spent a lot of seasons working for the Forest Service in the reforestation era. This is a quote from the newspaper, Happy Camp newspaper, and it's actually written verbatim. There's a typo in there, but it's not from me. But heavy smoke inundated the community for weeks, and it was a real eye-opener as to these fire-adapted systems. Even though this is a natural part of the cycle of where we live, the community was plagued with this fire. A lot of resources came to deal with this particular fire. 11,000 lightning strikes across the West during that year, and a very dynamic fire environment for those of our fire professionals that remember that. And then in the 2000, we had the fires in Colorado, a really intense year. 850 structures burned throughout the country. Well, we're upwards of 8,000 for this year. So that could be related to what Chris talked about with the wildland-urban interface and more expansion into that. But the fire dynamic is changing, a lot of suppression costs. And as a result of that, there was the National Fire Plan, a community-based effort through the Community Wildfire Assistance Program. That's a photo I took from Interstate 5 in 2004. That's of the ridge between Wrights Creek and Bear Creek in partnership with the city of ASHLAND in their fire and fuels program to abate the threat of fire on private lands. We inherited a pretty big 100 years of suppression, and the federal government was coming to assist private landowners. So all those bullets there talk about those approaches, and those approaches haven't changed. This collaborative effort hasn't changed. We've been evolving and learning more as we go. That's through the footprint of the 1959 fire that is really dense, and the work continues there. A lot of the effort was focused around homes, around home site defensible space. This is up on Strawberry Lane here in Ashland. One of our crew members trying to reduce that fuel density around homes to protect homes. But then we realized we needed to move beyond homes, working with our fire professionals, our civic leaders. You can see that photo on the left. We have a flat-headed borer beetle, a lot of mortality mixed with understory brush. So trying to restore or reduce the fuels in the ingress and egress. So the homes were protected, but fire response had to be able to get to those homes. So we were focused a lot on road systems and strategic areas. Then we had Stewardship Authority come about, which is a great tool to work with federal agencies to put restoration on the ground, thinking as we're treating the private lands, we need to be treating the federal lands, and we need to be working in all lands context because fire knows no boundaries. So with the Agency's Appropriations Act of 1999, we were able to get some projects on the ground. These are photos from Williams, Oregon. Exactly what Mark talked about, bringing the timber community together with the conservation community and the forest worker capacity to get some good work done on the ground. These are projects occurring right next to private lands where National Fire Plan dollars got put on the ground. This is on BLM lands where we're actually utilizing some of the small diameter material and building that framework and that model. So when we think about forest restoration, it's assisting the recovery of the ecosystem that's been degraded and impact. In this case, it's fire exclusion, ecological resilience for that system to be able to adapt and respond to disturbances, and then adaptive capacity. The word climate change is buzzing around in all of our minds as these fires are increasing. So just to look in a few places outside of the region, this is the rural forest-based community of Tilla, Oregon in South Umpqua. They had a huge fire in 2005, the Boulder Fire. We were able to bring the timber community together with the conservation community and begin to address the impacts to fire to plantations and late successional reserve habitats. You could see those small logs on the left there. That photo of the timber community working in tandem with Umpqua Watersheds, a conservation organization, and Lomacatsi to diversify these plantations to try to utilize some of the material out of those plantations, reduce fire threat, but also restore structure for wildlife and habitat. This is the skips and gaps approach, trying to diversify the stand structure. Now moving to the ASHLAND Forest Resiliency Stewardship Project, we have our partners, Chris Chambers, Division Chief of the City of Ashland over there. If you have questions, this has become a national model of how to address impacts to the community through wildfire, restore late successional habitat and protect habitat for the northern spotted owl, and protect the infrastructure and ecosystem services in the community. It was designed in an integrated approach, thinking about the municipal watershed, the spotted owls, and restoring open forest conditions and protecting the community. There's a lot of partners involved. It's an all-lands approach. We were selected across the country for the Joint Chiefs Landscape Program. Here's a photo of that quintessential wildland-urban interface. And still very dense throughout this landscape. A lot of work to do to treat those impacts. This is the moat around the castle. We're looking at a 52,000 acre footprint where we will treat 14,500 acres of that landscape in an ecological way. 28% of the landscape with the hopes of interrupting and abating the threat of fire. Protecting large old trees is a big emphasis of that effort. And then the boots on the ground, the people who put this effort on the ground, from the marking to the layout of the projects, it's a very different approach to a collaborative process through the partnership, where the partners do a lot of the work in tandem with the agency. And the skill sets on the ground to identify those key things we really care about, like the big old trees. And then a very robust multi-party monitoring effort led by the Nature Conservancy to learn as we go, learn by doing, a feedback loop on how our treatments can be conducted in an appropriate manner. To date, we've treated about 9,000 acres across the federal and private. You may have seen helicopters, you might see smoke during the fall and the winter. A lot of jobs created through this effort, 17 full-time equivalent, 25 million infused into communities, 200 personnel employed, contractors employed. So it's a shift to a restoration economy. And this collaborative process is happening all throughout Oregon. These are the collaboratives. There's many of them. Mark expressed one in the Blue Mountains, but many throughout the state trying to deal with these complex issues. Here's our wildfire season in Oregon and California. A lot of fire, a lot of smoke. Efforts over the hill in the Klamath Basin, in the Sage Steppe country of Modoc County. So all these collaborative efforts happening to restore the system, to make these forests more resilient, dense forests impacting our habitats we care about, like our oak woodlands, the loss of large old trees from densification, shading, and then trying to get fire back on the ground. A great example down in the mid-Klamath with the Karuk tribe and partners. So real quick, just to close up here, one solution forward and a big effort is the Rogue Basin Forest Restoration Cohesive Strategy for our part of the world. How are we going to address these impacts to the communities from wildfire risk and the restoration needs? And this approach is very similar to what we've been talking about. There's going to be no new roads proposed through this strategy. Primary objective is restoration. It's grounded in the Northern Spotted Owl Recovery Plan. And we're going to limit impacts. It's a tool, and this is an operation forward, utilizing an ecological thinning approach, reducing wildfire risk to people, supporting fire-adapted communities, and promoting economic growth, that triple bottom line of the social, ecological, and economic. Some of the things that were analyzed in that plan, unfortunately I'm going to be running out of time here, so I'm going to keep moving, but there are folks we can talk about this. And then some efforts there. And it's a lot of the same great stuff we've been talking about, but this is the plan for the Rogue Forest Initiative. We're moving forward to raise dollars, to work across the landscape in a collaborative fashion with our agency partners and communities, to address the threat of fire, to create more resilient systems, and create jobs within the process. It's a big lift, but we're up for the challenge, and we look forward to community input on these efforts.
Thank you, Marco. Bella's done a great job at keeping us on time here. Thank you. And I'm sorry you had to rush so much. We still have 20 minutes for discussion. So my job right now is to try to channel, if we were taking questions from you, what do I imagine those questions might be? And when I look out here, I see, I recognize a lot of people. It's really thrilling to see this many people come together around this topic. And the people I recognize have spent huge chunks of their career wrestling with these issues, careers and lifetimes, generations of folks trying to bridge the industrial, environmental, social gaps here. I guess I would address this question to Mark, but y'all jump in if you think it pertains to you. What social skills and relationships can we develop in the Rogue Basin to be most effective in accomplishing restoration?
Well, if you can't fight good, you better learn to talk. On a more serious note, and again, I'll just speak from personal experience, it's really important to appreciate that reasonable people disagree. Reasonable people disagree. And it's important to figure out the source of those disagreements, and that involves, I think, treating people humanely. as individuals that warrant respect, probably have a good reason for their concerns. You can't understand it. That's what it's like to treat somebody charitably. So you ask questions, you try to figure out where they're coming from. You spend time with them. What we did, again, it was painful. Some of the best forward progress we had is when we, after a meeting, and again, people on both sides of the wall, we're not talking to one another, we're talking through an intermediary. Talk about how grown up that is. We go to the bar afterwards. It's a small bar, so we have to sit with the people we couldn't stand. And you find out that this person you don't think you like, maybe you don't like them, their kid plays soccer and you're a soccer coach. Or they love to elk hunt and you got a good bull this year. Or they like to fish. And that's what I mean, creating those situations where you learn that people are people. Maybe some really strong disagreements, but there is a lot of overlap and there can be some anchors for that kind of stuff. But it requires humility. You have to admit that you've been wrong about some things, and most of us have in these situations. You're willing to listen to people, give them some respect, and go forward. And I can't help stress enough that part of the conversation is looking forward. This is the problem we got. This is where we are. How do we get to the desired outcome? That's the conversation to have instead of always looking back or being upset and stuff like that. So I think just some really good social skills, maturing, owning up to mistakes. Yeah, I could just go on.
Anyone else? Thank you. What's up, Alice? For Chris, do you think, you opened with the 1910 fire season, the big burn. Are we at a similar point in our collective consciousness here? Is the fire season we just had here and last year and what we're looking forward to, are we at a similar pivotal point in our reasoning about our role, our relationship with fire?
Wow.
I'm going to write this down, Chris.
Oh, boy. That's a really interesting question. And I hate to sort of speak for everybody. And I think the people that have worked with collaborative groups probably will have a better answer than I do. There's been a lot of interest this year from OPB and other media sources in fire management specific. There's really getting beyond just the discussion about the ecological sort of context, what the timber industry is doing, what spotted owl did, what fire suppression, but actually how are we managing fires? And that seems to be a shift, something new that the public is starting to become interested in, really what's going on with fire management. Can we get past this? And I think that does at least give me some hope that the public, all of you, and you're here today for obvious reasons, that we are at a similar state and that we are ready to come together possibly through collaboration and get there. And despite the lack of civility at our national level, we see all of these grassroots conversations and civility that are really expanding and really starting to become successful. So I would say that we if we're not there, we're on the verge of being there, and we're ready to start to move forward in a holistic fashion.
Thank you. Nothing like a softball question, huh? Marco, how will we develop the workforce and infrastructure to accomplish restoration on a landscape level?
Well, based on some of the slides I shared and the last 5 I rushed through, essentially this has been in development for years. With the shifting of the big tree timber economy, when I first moved here, I can remember the one tree log loads coming through town. There has been a shift. There was investments through the Jobs in the Woods program back in the 80s that we benefited from. So that transition's been in motion. And some of the slides I shared for these restoration efforts that are happening regionally, workforce effort has been in operation for years. That capacity is being leaned on. We're going to have to lean on each other. A lot of the work done on the ASHLAND Forest Resiliency Project has been from folks throughout the region, Mid-Klamath Watershed, Fremont, Wainema, coming to support each other through workforce training programs, through the change of the timber scaling of small diameter material, keeping our mill infrastructure in place, just that effort from the community-based collaboratives to keep that workforce vibrant and alive is continuing on. And building that skill set as the Forest Service and the agencies seem to be downsizing, the community needs to be stepping up. Investing in incubating businesses has been a big effort as well in the service and the timber side. Some very creative, innovative folks from the timber community who've had to make some attempts to get these materials out in a really different way than historically they would have. So creativity, that creativity together is ongoing. And then that investment in federal and state dollars to keep those workforce development efforts happening.
Are you hopeful that you'll see that federal and state dollar investment?
Well, that is the challenge, but with this fire season, you know, there is an urgency and an emergency. We have to address these forests and these issues. The benefit of Stewardship Authority is we're able to utilize some of the retained receipts from the sale of the restoration byproducts, the logs, to then reinvest back into additional restoration and workforce development. So there's creative ways we can match those resources, those funding resources, to get work done.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, and I just, a slightly different, maybe, yeah, slightly different side to that. That's kind of silly, actually. But our experience is that a big part of this is about helping the Forest Service shift how they do their work and what work they do. And again, I'm as timber industry supportive as can be, but the Forest Service's job is not just about cutting trees for industry. And I'm very sympathetic to the environmental community, but it's not just about setting aside parcels that never see any active management. The challenge we have now, which is what Chris talked about, is we've got a landscape that's in a certain condition. We need to figure out how to get it to a desired condition from where it is right now. And that's what the public, through informed public engagement, can help the Forest Service do. You can give them social license to go about their work differently. You can pressure Congress to actually fund the Forest Service at a level they need to be funded. Instead of always blaming the Forest Service for not getting stuff done, they're limited. And so those are other ways in which, whether it's a collaborative effort, a community effort, you can enhance and enable the Forest Service to go about their work different. As you shift that, you're going to start to create opportunities. They're going to open up things for new markets, for new training, and things like that. And so that's part of what we think about is how do we shift that? How do we help the Forest Service? That's going to make some shifts and some changes here. It's all about retooling.
Thank you. Does that mean I have 1 minute to clear the table? Okay.
You have 10.
Okay. I've got 10. Okay, thank you. You're very effective with those cards. Chris,
But zero small.
would you, Chris, address, you know, we have a certain set of objectives and options on federal land. What options do we have? What do we do about creating fire resiliency or fire resistance on private industrial forest lands?
Set me up with that one.
Yeah.
So just to give a quick background, this all stems from a recent study and publication that I had looking at the Douglas Complex fire in 2013 that burned up by Roseburg, and it burned across the ONC checkerboard landscape. And so you had every other square mile was private industrial forest or was BLM forest. Some of that being matrix, some of that being late successional reserves. And through that process, we discovered that fires burn more severely on the private industrial forest lands than the public lands. All right, so now a lot of that has to do with the age of the forest. So younger trees are just inherently more susceptible to death by fire than large trees are. So that's part of it, but they still had a signal beyond the age comparison across those two ownership. And so it also was about the structure and probably the density at which planting occurred on the private industrial forests that facilitated likely more active crown fires, that really uniform fuel bed that's created it's bigger than grass, but similar to what grass was or what we saw in the wheat fields in the northeast of Oregon this year. And so it's a really continuous field bed. And so private industrial forests do burn more severely. I think, they could restructure their forests and their expectations, but the economics really drive them to clear cut, right? So this is global economies, and it really drives them to clear cut to maximize their revenue. And in the case of when they're publicly owned, so they're in the stock market, then they're really bound by that. They have to provide that real, in this case, in today's day, real short-term economic return. And so they do have a sort of a directive, and they're stuck with that. But at some point, there's going to be enough fire that it's really going to flip that, where the fire risk is so high that it's no longer sustainable at that rate to expect that type of economic return. And they could essentially switch from this even age silviculture type management to an uneven age that promotes a diversity of stand structures where you have large trees and the younger trees that will grow into those eventually. And those large trees are inherently more resilient to fire, and therefore the economic loss when the fire comes will be mitigated to some degree for them, and how that influences the larger landscape will change as well, and so how it influences adjacent ownerships. And we don't fully understand how that interaction plays out, whether there's some facilitated contribution or contagion that occurs from public to private or private to public yet, but it's sort of ongoing efforts. And so they can shift to an uneven age type management, which would benefit them. They can also look at internally within their blocks of land how they retain various age classes of their forest and to minimize their overall loss. That is, if their square mile does burn, that at least a portion of it survives and can either be harvested in the future or is large enough at that time to harvest in a salvage context.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Marco, where do we target restoration work in the Rogue Basin?
Well, the Rogue Basin strategy does address that. Those key locations, typically, like in the ASHLAND Forest Resiliency Project is one example. We're focused on our ridge tops, which typically are more the open stand conditions historically. They also provide the benefit of fire suppression efforts in that case. We will still follow the Northwest Forest Plan, so we're limiting any treatments on riparian reserves. We're protecting northern spotted owl habitat, which tends to be in more of the darker, dense areas. So that is a big part of the focus, is the area where we can restore those open conditions, open stand conditions.
Thank you. Sometimes we speak in platitudes like, do you want your smoke all at once, or do you want it a little bit all year long? And I know that's not really funny to folks that have been through impaired air quality like we had here this summer. Can we accomplish restoration, fire management, without degrading critical air quality? And I'd say any one of you could address that. Is that a false choice?
No, but I think you have to put it in scale. If you talk about where we're looking in maybe 20 or 30 years, the answer is, I think, yes. But if you're talking about this year, the answer is no. And it's just because of the situation we're in. We're probably, even if desired conditions are relatively frequent but low intensity fires, there will be more smoke than what we were used to as a community in the past. But that level of intensity doesn't necessarily mean that your health is impaired or visibility is impaired and so on. But that's looking down the road 15 or 20 years. And so for me, that's why I hesitate to give an answer, because I think you got to hedge it in a whole bunch of ways. Chris?
He's absolutely right. I did an assessment. I think, say, we're sort of in this, I guess, climax Douglas fir region here, and really we're burning at 1 or 2% per year of the land base. It's sort of an ongoing average. It's rising and it's inclining, so that might accelerate. The reality is, if we were to get back to, say, a 10-year fire return interval for some simple numbers, that we would have to burn 10% per year. That could be 5 to 10 times as much as is burning right now. That's a sideboard. I don't know that we're necessarily driving to get to that state, but that should give you some semblance of where we could end up at some point. Now, if we did get there and in the long term got there, we're talking about certainly less intense smoke that arrives. It's going to be more dispersed and it wouldn't be as impactful to your health. That, again, is not in the near term. But recognizing that fire is inevitable and accepting the inevitability of fire is a first step to recognizing that we're going to have to live with smoke. I think I once couched it like transitioning from smoky bear to smoky air. That's really what we're talking about. I mean, it's fundamentally what we're talking about. And you have to accept the fact that fire is inevitable, smoke is inevitable. Our decision point really is about what type of smoke or how dense that smoke is in the future.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes, and I'll give it to Mark.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Thinking about prescribed fire and the fire-adapted environment going into the future, we're looking at around 55,000 acres a year that will need to be ecologically, mechanically treated in a responsible fashion to set the stage for the reintroduction of fire or under fire suppression criteria, the management of fire that has a benefit to the resource. So over the course of the next 20 to 30 years, there's a pretty heavy lift in the Rogue Basin of that restorative work to set that stage, just to put the context on that part of it. So looking at about 1/4 of the landscape.
And just to add, and I think this goes back to the point I made about asking what the landscape needs, we're talking about how do we avoid smoke impacts to us, which is entirely appropriate. But what's important to appreciate is the picture that Chris has talked about, that Marco's talking about, getting the landscape to. Fire is a healthy part of a healthy landscape. So it's not just about us avoiding stuff, it's about us helping the landscape become healthy and what that essentially exercise regime is and figuring out how to live with that. And so I think those are the kind of questions that we need to have, conversations we need to have. It's not just about avoiding. What does it actually need? How will it improve that? And how do we change?
Excellent. Excellent. Very good job, you guys. Thank you so much. I did see some hands waving out there. Please remember that these folks will all be around later for some one-on-one conversation.
And let's give a hand to the forest panel for a tremendous presentation. So we've gotten to the point, it's our first 2-minute transition. We heard some wonderful information, some inspiring words about how we can work together, and some realistic ideas about what smoke may continue to look like within our valley. So it's appropriate now, I think, to invite our panel up here, which is going to talk to us about individual and community health. We'll invite them up, but again, we're going to try and make the transition quick. So thank you.
Glad to see you.
Please take your seats again, please. A lot of good thoughts and comments generated by the last panel, I know, and we want to try and stay to the schedule as much as we can here. Okay, if I could have your attention, please, and we'll resume. So we know that much of the concern over the past summer for all of us was, what are the impacts of all of this on our lungs? What are the short-term impacts? What are the longer-term impacts? What should we be doing for our vulnerable communities? We've always thought of shelters as being a winter kind of thing. Do we need shelters in the summertime now? Our next panel is going to address many of those both individual and community issues. And I want to introduce Belle Shepard, who will be the moderator of this panel. Belle is an innovator agent with the Oregon Health Authority, and she supports health systems transformation with local coordinated care organizations and the communities of 4 Southern Oregon counties. Her prior experience includes positions as the Jackson County Public Health Division Manager and the Josephine County Public Health Division Manager. Belle holds a master's in public health from the University of Washington, and we welcome her up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Marsh. Good morning. Good morning. Can you try that again? You guys were almost there. Good morning. Yay. Okay, now that we're having a conversation, I just wanted to ask if you would raise your hand if you felt like you had a health effect from the smoke this summer. So maybe watery eyes or cough, or keep your hands up, or something more serious, maybe asthma was exacerbated, or COPD. Those that aren't raising your hand, I'm surprised, but majority of people are raising their hands. You know, we're all kind of in this together, as we know. I think this is a really concerning piece, but it's also a thing that can bring us together as a community, I think, to be more resilient in terms of our conversations. I appreciated the first panel really talking about how we work from different sides of this perspective, and when we come from a health thing, I think we're all on the same side of the perspective. We know it's affecting us that are in the room. It's probably affecting all of those that aren't in this room as well. So I hope we kind of keep that in mind and really think about how we can help our neighbors and be a more resilient community as we move this forward. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll just go ahead and give all introductions, and then I'll ask them to speak individually. So Lillian Shirley is the director of Oregon Health Authority's Public Health Division. She most recently led the Multnomah County Health Department. She served as vice chair of the Oregon Health Policy Board, which designed Oregon's transformation plan, and is founding chair of HealthShare, Oregon's largest coordinated care organization. Ms. Shirley has served on several boards, including the Public Health Foundation and the Oregon Public Health Institute, and a little bird told me it's her birthday, too.
Should we sing happy birthday?
Yeah. So be nice. No, I'm just kidding. Dr. Richard Lehman is the Chief Medical Officer for Health Security Preparedness and Response, and a medical epidemiologist and tribal epidemiology liaison for Oregon Health Authority's Public Health Division. So kind of a big job there. He has worked in multiple capacities at the Public Health Division, including as a chronic disease epidemiologist. Past positions include Epidemic Intelligence Surveillance Service Officer for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, primary care physician at Multnomah County Health Department, and medical director at the Seelitz Community Health Center. Thank you, Dr. Lehman, for coming down. And Jackson Bowers manages Jackson County Public Health Division, which provides numerous programs and services, including communicable disease, maternal and child health, health promotion, prevention, and environmental public health. He holds a master's in management from Southern Oregon University, that's here, and a graduate certificate in public health from OHSU. His prior roles with Jackson County include Environmental Public Health Division Manager and Health and Human Services Emergency Preparedness Coordinator. Thanks, Jackson.
Thank you.
So I'm going to join you up there, but Lillian, I'm going to have you kick us off and talk about your role and the work OHA does.
Thanks very much. I think we've tried to also today, just by who's on the panel, to talk about how we're in this together as a system across Oregon, and how we need to build on different roles. The forest management discussion that we just had was really wonderful, and I think it highlighted that there are no simple answers to this incredibly complex problem that we're in, that's our reality, and will be facing us for quite a while. And in addition to the complexity of it, we realize that there's no one true bullet, there's no one true way to look at it, and we're going to have to work through building community solutions and understanding some of the consequences of it. I was telling Belle when we were preparing for this, even though I live in the northern part of the state in the Multnomah County area, just around Labor Day, I got 2 emails from friends saying, can anybody come and stay with, one was somebody's mother and the other was somebody's father who actually lived down here. And because of the air quality, they had to leave and were living with their children up in the Portland area. And school was going back and people were going back to teaching jobs, et cetera, and they were asking, can somebody stay and help us because we can't leave. Both families felt they couldn't leave their parent alone. And they didn't feel that it was safe yet to have them return to their own home. So I think that that just, for me, illustrates on many levels across our society right now and across our state, the impacts, the obvious day-to-day impacts of the air quality monitoring and the smoke that you may see on the ridge when you're camping. Happened to me last summer. That we forget that there's these unseen consequences that we're going to have to prepare for and make sure that we have these supports across all of our communities. I'm here to just mention the kinds of things that the Oregon Health Authority and the Public Health Division does, and some of the things we've learned from the last, actually this is 3 of 4 bad summers, and what we need to really get together, not as a response for what's happening in the summer, for our air quality and our health status, but also how do we prepare once we get into the rainy season, what are some of the things that we're going to be looking at together with your hospitals and health systems and your insurers to think about next year and prepare going forward, and some of the changes that we've made too. We provide supportive role in wildfire responses and the wildfire smoke events. And one of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years is we work much closer than we ever have with an understanding of all of our Forest Service professionals, our firefighters, both wildland and structure fires, and our state agencies that are around natural resources. So that we've really come together on a state level to plan together and to understand if we're going to look at works around controlled burns, for instance, there was some measure of discussion about that earlier. Right now, we have public health sitting in those discussions to say, what are the factors that we should be considering? What are the possible consequences? And what are some of the information that we need to know into those decisions, not just for the ecosystem, but also for the personal health of the people in the region as well. So I think that that's something that's come out in the last couple of years, learning how to approach this together. We have an Oregon, I'm sorry, I'm suffering the 2.9 mile walk here. With other organizations, we've developed this response protocol for severe smoke episodes so that we can respond more quickly. We know where to look for the data, and we know how to interpret the data more rapidly and get the communications out to the community. We've also improved access to health information. We've had a concerted effort to translate all of our wildfire smoke communication tools for many partners to use, for the disability community to use, as well as English as a second language communities to use. And we've developed guidance that assists tribal and local partners in making determinations in their local communities about how to decide how to create a cleaner airspace. What we do at the state level as a resource for all of you is we have systems in real time to look at monitoring air quality with the Department of Environmental Quality. And we also have a system that tells us in real time emergency room visits for what we would consider smoke-related or potentially smoke-related illnesses that would be unusual in the community, whether they would be connected to cardiovascular events or connected to any kind of lung problems that people might have or exacerbations of pre-existing conditions. And we share that real-time information with our local partners. And then we use, we were able during last year's fire season to work with the federal government, the Medicaid and Medicare agency, and to actually get permission to have the information about people in our communities that are dependent upon electronic help aid. So think of your CPACs, think of your oxygen tanks, think of other people who we can find out on a macro level in a community, you know, where do people live who have problems with transportation, et cetera. And so that makes us more capable of working with the community about what are the communities or where do people live who are particularly vulnerable in any kind of an emerging smoke event. Or in, you know, hopefully not, but if there's a need for an evacuation, how can we target people who need that help? It also helps us knowing where those people, where the first responders will relocate those people, and then we'll be able to follow that information to make sure that people get any medicines that they need, any oxygen tanks is a big one, to be able to make sure that people are able to get those referrals if you don't know where they are, and if your providers don't know where you are, to make sure that that is a seamless system. And that is something else that we've been able to develop over the last 2 fire seasons, and with community first responders. We've also been able to, the other innovation that has happened is that when the governor declares an emergency, we're then allowed to, what we developed last year is we're allowed to have kind of emergency support for people who don't have licenses to practice in our state. So in the recent fire season, or the fire season we're still in, we actually had 147 emergency medical personnel that came from out of state to support the work here in Southern Oregon, to that are authorized for their temporary licenses to work here. And as most of you know, wherever you have a fire crew on the ground, you have to have medical support. So this was a bad year all around on the West Coast. So last year we depended a lot from people from California. This year, not so much. We were getting first responders coming into the state from Idaho and other parts of Washington, and even as far away as Montana. So these are the kinds of things that we're learning. How can we better support and protect the community in real time? The other thing we've done is try to figure out a system to really look at this issue of temporary room air filters. Like, what does work, what doesn't work? How many square feet are you in? How many square feet, how much capacity do you need, and what you're going to make a decision about purchasing? Trying to work, and Jackson will refer more to this, but locally, if you do have public shelters, can we over this winter really start looking at how many square feet we need? How can we help more public buildings be on inventories for people to know in their community where they are and have better access to them? And how can we support those public buildings to know what is effective and how much capacity will they need over a longer period of time? So we continue to provide information. We continue to provide evidence-based guidance to help guide decision-making on the local level. And we're trying to leverage all of our partnerships across the state and in other sectors that are concerned. Your local providers, your local community, associated with hospitals and private practices, to really work together to find out what their real experience is and what is it that we can provide for you. The bad news is I don't have an answer. We're going to have to work on this together, but I do want to point out that we are working across the West, and I'm working closely with my colleagues in the state of California, and we're looking at how do we get on the national agenda more research around long-term chronic effects of living in this new reality. And we also know that communities can look at other ways. There are other ways that you get these particulates in the air, and can we decrease particulates in other sectors or other ways within looking at manufacturing and transportation, so that the total burden caused in the air by the wildfire seasons can be mitigated in other ways, kind of balancing those things out. So thank you very much for inviting us, and thank you for all of your resilience.
Thanks, Lillian. So, Dr. Lehman, I'll ask you to speak about the health effects of smoke.
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Bill. And I also wanted to thank Pam Marsh and Paige, as well as Bill, for organizing this, and thanks to all of you for being here. So my topic is health effects. So a good place to start, I think, is what's in wildfire smoke that might cause problems. There are gases in wildfire smoke, most notably carbon monoxide, which at high levels can rob the body of oxygen, make it tough for the blood to take up oxygen. Happily, this is not something that moves very far from the fire, and it's mainly a problem for firefighters who are right there kind of cleaning up the smoldering hot spots. There are aromatic hydrocarbons, and that's kind of a long name that's based on the chemical structure of these. But long story short, these are like the things that are in the tar from cigarettes. And if you're exposed to a lot of that over many years, it may increase the risk of some kinds of cancer. These come from many different sources, and we think actually that even with a longer fire season, the total amount, the total fraction that you get from wildfire smoke is not very high. But of course you want to avoid any of it that you can. And then I'm going to move on to particles, and some of these are very small, less than the width of a human hair, and these are actually the things that are causing the highest risk for acute illness. And this is important, particularly for people who have underlying heart disease or lung disease. So your risk of having symptoms from being exposed to wildfire smoke is determined by several things. First of all, what's in the smoke. We just talked about that a bit. The amount of smoke that's coming through, how long totally you're exposed to it, and this is important, underlying health conditions that people have. The biggest risk, and this is important, the biggest risk is for people who have underlying heart disease or lung disease. And let's talk about the health effects a bit. So short term, I don't need to tell you folks this. I mean, as Belle was mentioning, stinging, burning eyes, and irritated throat and cough. And unfortunately, most of us, if we get exposed to enough smoke, we're going to experience those, and those are really a drag. And I know that, and I hate it when I'm exposed to it too. I guess the only good thing about that is typically once you get rid of the smoke, it goes away, and those symptoms go away, and they tend not to cause ongoing problems. Long term, the data are less clear. We don't really have great evidence around long-term exposure to wildfire smoke, but we do have some studies looking at other kinds of air pollution that contain those same small particles, and it does look as though if young kids are exposed for months to years, it may somewhat increase their risk of developing asthma down the road. So that's potentially a concern. We're still kind of looking into that. In terms of risk of serious illness is mainly in the acute setting, and again, it's mainly for people who have underlying heart or lung disease. And this is because in those very fine particles, big particles, our systems are built to kind of filter those out. And so they, your nasal passages kind of stop that stuff from getting down there. But these very fine particles get way down into the lungs, and they can actually get into the bloodstream. And this can cause problems for people who have underlying asthma. This can cause people with underlying chronic lung disease like emphysema, and it can make their breathing much tougher. It can mess them up, and sometimes lead to a need for hospitalization. Doesn't always do that, but it increases the risk. The biggest risk, though, is for people with heart disease. And the reason is that those fine particles get into the bloodstream and they cause irritation in there, and that can increase the risk in somebody who has underlying heart disease of having a heart attack or potentially having an irregular heart rhythm that sometimes can be dangerous or even fatal. Again, this is not something that happens all the time, but there is a small increase in the risk of that. And that's the reason we try to really try to encourage people to avoid being out in the smoke as much as possible. So who is at higher risk? Again, I've already mentioned people who have underlying heart disease or lung disease are the folks who are at potentially the biggest risk from exposure to wildfire smoke. We also think about kids, though. Kids spend a lot of time outside. They spend a lot of time running around. And the amount of air that they breathe compared to the, how big they are is more than for an adult. And so they may be more at risk for some of these other symptoms like getting severe cough, and if they have asthma, that can certainly be a problem for them. If somebody's elderly, they may run into problems, not necessarily just because they're over 65, but people over 65 maybe are more likely to have underlying lung or heart disease. And so that's one reason we encourage people to try to avoid being in the smoke. We don't have a lot of data with regard to pregnant women from wildfire smoke, but we do know from tobacco smoke and the fine particles that are in there that sometimes that can cause problems with a pregnancy. And so we just think it's prudent for pregnant women to think of themselves as potentially vulnerable. And finally, people who are homeless or people who may have to work outside all the time. Just because they're exposed to the smoke for longer periods, they may be more likely to have some of the symptoms that you've experienced. And in particular, it's a concern if they have underlying heart or lung conditions. So what can you do to reduce the risk? And again, this is especially important for those people who are at risk for severe, serious problems like people with heart or lung disease. Since the risk is basically due to the amount of smoke that you're exposed to and the total time that you're exposed, the more time you're inside in a less smoky space, the better off you are. And so spending some time inside is good. If people can leave the area, and Lillian referred to this, if you can leave the area for a time and you're in a place that doesn't have smoke, then that's potentially a great strategy. Not everybody has that option, of course. And Lillian alluded to this. People with heart disease and lung disease in particular should strongly consider getting an air filter, because again, if you use an air filter they're shown to be effective in decreasing the amount of these fine particles that are in the air indoors, and they keep working. Even though the smoke stays heavy outside, they work in order to keep the level of these fine particles down. And so the more time you can spend in a place which has cleaner air, the better off you are, the less time you're exposed to these fine particles. So I think Belle is going to have a few questions for us that she's going to pepper us with, so I'll be talking with you again a bit later, but I'm turning it over to Jackson.
Thank you.
So good morning, and thanks for having me here today. Before I start, I'm going to keep the introductory remarks short so we have more time for the panel, but I'd like to get an idea by show of hands, how many of you live in Jackson County? Oh, wow, so vast majority. Now keep your hands up. Oh, sorry. Keep your hands up if you live in ASHLAND. Okay, so it seems like about a majority from ASHLAND. Just good to know who we're speaking with in this case. So during wildfire events, Jackson County Public Health collaborates with several agencies and community partners. We collaborate with the Oregon Health Authority, Department of Environmental Quality, the National Weather Service, local school districts, the medical community, the media, many others, including the ASHLAND Chamber of Commerce. The primary objective we have is to ensure that the public and community partners are informed of health risks of smoke and what they can do to protect themselves. While I hope this summer was the worst summer that we've seen, and it certainly was the worst summer I've seen, I've lived in this area for about 20 years, hope is a poor planning tool. And so we're going to continue working with our community. I didn't know that would get a laugh, so I'm going to use that more. So, hope is a poor planning tool. So we're going to continue to work with our community to make sure that we're better prepared for wildfire events and can have a better response to those. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. So if hope is one of your emergency preparedness planning things you're putting in your box, you might want to replace that with water or something else. Just paraphrasing what you said. Okay.
Thank you.
Jackson, can you, I think the number one question that I hear for health professionals is, what about masks? How do masks help or not help? What kind of masks work? What should we be considering when we're looking at those?
Yeah, so first off, as Richard said, the best protection from smoke is to stay inside if you can. However, I know that's not possible for everyone. If you have to be outside for prolonged periods of time, a respirator can actually help you. I want to distinguish between what people call masks and respirators. Sometimes they're used interchangeably. A surgical mask, a dust mask, a wet bandana, a napkin, those aren't helpful. Those aren't respirators. So if you are going to wear a respirator, number one, it needs to be the right type. And there's a lot of information around on this, and I actually have a handout at the table by the door. Yeah, from the
We brought
EPA.
visuals.
Thank you. So it needs to be the right type, marked NIOSH with N95 or P100, and also needs to be properly fitted, and that could be challenging. Living in this community I actually live in Medford. During the worst smoke events, I commonly see people riding around on bicycles, going places. Surgical masks, they have beards, there's open areas of them. They're not the right type, and they're not fitted properly to their face. So they need to be properly fitted. And this handout actually describes how to properly fit the mask to you. Importantly, respirators aren't designed for children, and if you have facial hair, it's not going to work. It's not going to provide any protection for you. Importantly, as Richard said, if you have underlying heart or lung conditions, you really need to consult with your medical provider first. Simply put, wearing a respirator makes it difficult to breathe. Even healthy adults find it uncomfortable to wear respirators for a long period of time. So with that said, in summary, respirators are really a last resort that can be beneficial for some, but it can also give a false sense of security. And again, those respirators are dealing with particulate matter, what we call that PM 2.5 that Richard was talking about. They don't filter out the gases. So understand that they're not a perfect solution, but they can be helpful for some populations if you get the right type and fit it right and wear it according to the manufacturer's recommendations.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Dr. Lehman a follow-up. So if I'm wearing a mask and I feel better, that means it's working, right? I'm sure none of us have been asked.
Yeah, well, and yeah, I do some things other than masks that make me feel better, but I don't always know. Yeah.
This is
But I don't always know. I don't always know that it was because I did the thing. So yeah, I think with respirators, as Jackson was saying, it's kind of tricky because they were developed for use in the workplace and in healthcare. So I've used them. Now I can't because of this, but I've used them before in healthcare, and they're typically for use for short periods of time, and they are for use in a setting where people have had a chance to get formally fit tested in order to make sure that they're working and that there's a good seal so that stuff isn't going around the sides of the mask or underneath. Because if that's happening, it's, as Jackson mentioned, it's just not doing you a heck of a lot of good, unfortunately. So I think, as he pointed out, if people can get fit tested to use them correctly, and sometimes that may be possible in the healthcare setting. To get appropriately fit tested, you can have a bit more confidence that they're actually doing you some good. There was a study that they did during Hurricane Katrina where these N95 respirators were distributed to people who were going back in and cleaning up mold, and they chatted with a bunch of these folks, and they found out that 1 in 4 of them even put it on correctly. So 3/4 of the people were not putting it on right, which means that it's probably not going to work all that well. So I think that particularly for the folks who have heart and lung disease, who are the folks who really are at highest risk for severe problems, I am concerned that it could create, as Jackson mentioned, a false sense of security. So I'm not saying don't wear masks, but I can't promise you that they're protecting you effectively unless you wear them the right way and you have appropriate fit testing.
Thank you. We could probably talk about that all day, but I'll move us on. Dr. Lehman, okay, or the other things that you do there. But, could you talk to us about other tools that are available? You mentioned HEPA filters, maybe a little more information on that,
Sure.
or as well as other tools.
Sure. And so HEPA filters are, I think, well, I won't say they're the best thing since sliced bread, but I think that they're very reasonable for somebody to consider if somebody has these underlying conditions of chronic underlying lung condition, including asthma, or people who have heart disease, because they work. We've got good evidence that they work well, and as I mentioned earlier, if the smoke is heavy outside and you have a place inside that's a refuge and where you've got clean air, I think that that's an easy way for a person to avoid that ongoing exposure. And when you go out in a car, if you need to run out and run errands, and of course people do have to run errands, if you can put the air on recirculate in the car, that also is helpful in terms of protecting you during that trip from exposure to the fine particles. So again, for people with heart conditions or lung conditions, long story short, the less time that you're actually out and exposed to the particles, the better.
Thank you. Lillian, another tool I think that we've talked about is staying inside with air conditioning. And of course, not everyone has air conditioner. Common practice here is to really, open your windows at night, right? Because it's cooler and you finally will cool off during the day. You'll wake up to a nice cool morning before it gets hot again. Thoughts for someone who doesn't have air conditioning either in their home or car or otherwise?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough one. I think that what we're experiencing with the fire seasons is also heat. We're having heat-related problems as well. We're having higher temperatures that are lasting for longer, and they're showing up at strange times of the year. We have August weather at 4th of July, things like that. So we have to put the combination, I think, of heat stress along with what we're experiencing with the results of wildland fires. And, my experience looking at the heat maps that we have, it isn't cooling down at night. So that you can't count on that as to, kind of get your air recirculated. And the smoke isn't going to go away at night. The particulate matter isn't necessarily going to go away at night. So I think that that's, in the same way that, Richard was saying, as neutral as we can, our biggest fear is having people have something that they think will protect them and then it won't. It's, to be cautious, to really look at the different tools. We've talked about filters, we've talked about respirators, we've talked about staying inside, we've talked about community shelters, et cetera, but understanding what they can do and what they can't do. That being said, I just think it's always really important for us to understand what exactly is the risk we're talking about, and you heard Dr. Lehman speaking about, there's things that we haven't seen really have emergent long-term effects that we've seen that are emergencies. We haven't seen more, for instance, cardiac arrests this winter that we would expect. Things that we know that this is particularly a problem with people with underlying heart disease. But so I think we also have to not live in fear, but live with your community solutions and work on that. But there just isn't one just isn't one bullet that we can give you or one assurance that we can give you. And that's hard for scientists to say, we are learning. We know more than we did 3 and 4 years ago. We know that we have to pay more attention. We have to do what we call surveillance, not like the government calls surveillance, but really looking at, what is happening in a community in terms of health outcomes. And we're doing that, and we're trying to do it as much as we can and sharing it with communities in real time.
So actually, Bill, thanks, Lillian. And just to add to that, the information that we have about the health effects, the more serious health effects of the fine particles that we've been talking about is from other types of air pollution that also contain these. We don't really have a lot of really great scientific information where there's been research done in the setting of wildfires yet. So we do know that when these fine particles from other kinds of air pollution that they can potentially cause problems for people with these underlying health conditions we've talked about. It may be that there are other things in urban air pollution that are making that worse and that are not showing up in wildfire smoke. I don't know. I wish I did know, because then I could tell you. But I think that because we do know that these fine particles can have these effects, that's why we think it's prudent, it makes sense, it's reasonable to try to avoid exposure to them.
Thank you. And Jackson, I wanted to touch on a few things that have been mentioned, but maybe we can talk about what's happening locally. I've had the question of, are there mandatory evacuations for smoke? Is that something we foresee? Are there shelters that might be available for folks if that was an opportunity, that was necessary? What can folks do? What's going to happen in that sense?
And we haven't had mandatory evacuations for smoke. Typically during a wildfire event, the evacuations are a result of the fire threatening structures, threatening human life. However, when the smoke gets unhealthy or worse, we do recommend that vulnerable populations, that sensitive groups, leave the area if they're able to do so. With that said, many people can't do that. In fact, a majority of people don't have the option to do that. They're not mandatory evacuations. During the high smoke and heat periods this year, there were various churches that provided cooling shelters that also acted as cleaner air shelters. I also understand that Southern University had opened up a building as a cleaner air shelter. And people can also go to malls and libraries for short periods of time. But moving forward, and I think Lillian mentioned this is something that requires some work in terms of identifying cleaner air shelters and publicizing those to make sure people know where those actually are in the future. So that's something to work on.
Okay, thank you. So Lillian, just in terms of public health approach to this, because we're seeing this as ongoing, right? Is this related to other climate change issues that public health deals with? Because I know public health, both at the state level and the local level, does work on climate change issues. How does that relate to wildfires and maybe other issues in the climate change spectrum?
Well, we do know that these trends are observable and that we've seen them. And looking at that without prescribing, causes, we do know that we have to mitigate how our approaches are. So some of the things that we know with the shifts in environmental and climate conditions, we want to help people build this community resiliency. Some of the data, I think, is really catching us, not like by surprise when you look at it. Between 2000 and 2011, our whole state only had 10 or fewer days of poor air quality. And you've seen some of the maps from the last, that's Blue Mountain area, that's all over the state, 10 or fewer days of quality. What we have seen since 2012 is we've had 20 summer days with poor air quality or extremely poor air quality. So looking at that, we have to say, this is not just, we can't just blame this on wildfires. We have to look at it more holistically. We have to decide how are we going to look at this, what we're building with, how we're giving recommendations to people about recreational options, what our choices are. We're trying to work together with communities. We have some pilots around the state, out in the Bend area, in the Deschutes County and Crook County area, working with communities to see what are some of the things that they would like to come up with from their day-to-day work in the community and their day-to-day approach, how with the schools, et cetera, they want to think about adapting to these changes that we're seeing. So we know that there's a lot of sources to air pollution, for instance, that are contributing factors. Dr. Lehman mentioned even cigarette smoke. There's things in the cigarette smoke that are not good for us and our cardiovascular and lung health. But what we're trying to look at with other agencies across the state is exactly what is the ecosystem in Oregon and what are some of the recommendations that communities can talk about their own life and talk to us about what they would like to see us to research and to give them information about as we move forward. But the projections are, and there's a lot of research on this, that this will be a continuing trend that we need to understand. I think, and this is kind of a sidebar, one of the things that happened this year with the structure fires that we've seen more and more, particularly in California, and working with first responders, not only are our civilians at greater risk, but obviously our first responders are at greater risk. And now we're trying to figure out what are the other things that are in the air from the structure fire that is in addition to the things that we find in wildland fire. So, you think about it, houses burn down, they have particle board, they have roofing material, like just trying to anticipate what are some of the things that we need to think through and get more data and information about for recommendations about maybe what we build with, in these interfaces, et cetera. So, trying to look at it more holistically, Belle, and not just this is a health problem or this is a economic problem or this is a Forest Service problem, but really coming to a community solution. And I know that sounds, a little wonky, or like maybe a cliche, but we're really understanding that this is the only way for these complex solutions to be ferreted out and tested, and we're going to make mistakes, and then hopefully, we can come back to the drawing board when it starts raining every year and think about what can we do better and know better and share better among our communities.
Great, thank you. Just looking if anyone else had other stuff to add to that. Jackson? No?
Oh, no, not to that. I did want to, if there was time, I did want to talk about the kind of the best resources for identifying air quality for folks.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about that. So when I was working in Josephine County about 15 years ago, they said, if you can't see that mountain over there, and it had a name that, of course, I didn't know the name of because I didn't live there, they said, then you should cancel football practice. I felt like that was a bad way to... Some people could see the mountain better than I did. I didn't even know what mountain they were referring to. And I just didn't feel like that was adequate public health practice, at least. So, no, it wasn't scientific to me. But that was the rule of thumb, right? So you have other ways that we can look at that, Jackson?
Yeah. Well, one, I wanted to bring everyone's attention. There's a lot, of course, when you go online, you can find a lot of different websites regarding air quality. But the Department of Environmental Quality, also known as DEQ, their air quality index can be found on a site called the Oregon Smoke Blog. You can use a search engine, Oregon Smoke Blog, it'll pop up. If you need the actual address, it's the, I won't say www, but that's what it is. Oregon Smoke, that's one word, .blogspot.com. So organsmoke.blogspot.com. Now this is an excellent site that actually shows the air quality monitors. It also contains various other information about health effects from smoke. It's operated by the DEQ. The press releases from Jackson County, from cities, from the state, those all get put there. So I recommend you look at that site first. A lot of people aren't on a computer and using their smartphone. So there's also a site from DEQ called Oregon Air, and to get to it, search Oregon Air, one word, in your apps. And you'll be able to see what's going on in terms of all the different smoke monitors in the area. But getting to Bell's point, a lot of people don't live close to air quality monitors. There aren't a lot of monitors based on the geographic area and the number of people we have in Jackson County. So there is a visibility index that's actually found on the smoke blog. It's called the 531 Visibility Index. And to back up a bit, as you know, you may be looking at a monitor in Ashland or Medford, but Applegate's going to look entirely different, or Shady Cove could look entirely different. So if you go to the smoke blog, you can find that. But simply put, if visibility is over 5 miles, the air is generally good. If it's about 5 miles, maybe over, but the air is hazy and moderate, kind of like it probably is right now, it's probably moderate. Under 5 miles, it's probably unhealthy for sensitive groups. Under 3 miles, the air quality is likely unhealthy for everyone in that unhealthy category. And if it's under 1 mile, which we experienced for much of this summer, unfortunately, it's probably very unhealthy or hazardous. So it's a conjunction of kind of taking visibility, looking at the air quality monitors. The air quality monitors can lag behind by about an hour. So it's a good idea to actually use your eyes and look at those monitors.
Thank you. And I'm getting the hook from Representative Marsh over here. I just want to say one more thing, is that I think, as we saw, we're all in this together. Sometimes we have neighbors that don't have access to this type of information, or literally hate the media and will never pay attention, but might be sensitive groups, right? So if we can not only help ourselves and help with our harm reduction of our own health, we can help our neighbors, and there's some great materials. Lillian's reminding me on the front table over there by the door, please take some. But remind us that we're part of this community together, so we might have an elderly couple or small kids down the street, or even the homeless man that we pass by. And anyway, I think that we can continue to inform and help each other. I think we'll be better off as a community.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous point, because really what it boils down to, a resilient community is one where people, know who's in the neighborhood, know who might need a little bit of extra help when it gets really hot or really smoky, and checks in on them. And that's what makes the difference in a resilient community.
Perfect. Thank you for that ending. Okay.
Thank you all.
Many thanks to the health panel for some very pragmatic advice and predictions for the future. So we're going to do just a 2-minute transition. We're going to do this one fast. Get up if you need to, come back quickly, and we'll talk about what the economic ramifications of this summer have been for us and how we respond. Oh, is that good? Cool. And now I'm going to ask for your conversations to stop so we can move on. Over there at the tables, please stop. Good luck with that. Oh, I can hear it coming down, down, down. Thank you. I know there's so much interesting information, and we do encourage you to check the tables because we have some wonderful materials available and individuals to talk with you there. So one of the challenging things of this summer, of course, was the economic impact. We know that Shakespeare, which last year canceled 6 or 8 performances, canceled upwards of 24. There are ramifications far beyond Shakespeare. Britt had similar experiences. Our tourism industry was hard hit. And that means money out of the pockets of those of us who live here in Southern Oregon. So our next panel is going to address what the economic consequences of smoke and fire are, and to give us some ideas about resources that may be available to local businesses and how we can all come together to build, frankly, the word of the day, a more resilient local economy. And I want to introduce Bill Thorndike, who's the moderator of this panel. Oops, where's my page? Here we go. Actually, all of you know Bill, or many of you do. Bill operates his family business, Medford Fabrication, which is a custom metals fabrication company that has been in operation for 75 years. He currently serves, and this is just what he currently serves on, the boards of SOU Board of Trustees, the Southern Oregon Regional Economic Development, Inc., Oregon Business Council, Regents Oregon, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Crater Lake National Park Trust, Oregon Economic Forum, Jefferson Regional Health Alliance, Philanthropy Northwest, Cascade Siskiyou Fund, and the Northwest Health Foundation. Someone who certainly knows our business community backwards and forwards and has for many years. Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam. As I was thinking about this and really the economic development impact of the smoke and the fires, of course, I remembered back to the most famous quote from the Supreme Court from Justice Potter Stewart in 1964. He was talking about obscenity, and he said, I know it when I see it. And I think we're kind of in that same realm here, and I'm very pleased with the panelists we have today, because you're going to hear about what's happening around economic changes, development opportunities at the root level, at the floor level here. Having served on the Federal Reserve Board of San Francisco, of course, you're always faced with the macroeconomic picture, and then also the labor economic picture, which is really talking about people. The reality is we know that having the fires that we have in our region, the ultimate economic impact at a macro level might actually be positive, with all the hundreds of millions of dollars that are actually spent on fighting fires. And so it's going to be very interesting for Guy Tower to look at the economic impact at a labor basis later this summer or this fall, when you think of, again, the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been dislocated from ticket sales or from rafting trips or from whatever to where we are today. So I'm very pleased to have a panel for us to at least will give us some idea of what are we doing relative to the economic impact and what can we do better as we go forward. So I'm pleased to have on our panel today Alex Campbell, who is the Southern Oregon Regional Solutions Coordinator with the Office of Governor Kate Brown. Alex previously was the Executive Director of the Partnership for Economic Development in Douglas County, so he has a good perspective, again, as to what the fires created in that area. He also led resource and economic development efforts in the city of Milwaukee in Clackamas County. Prior to moving to Oregon, he was a faculty research associate at the University of Maryland and performed public policy research for several small think tanks. He holds a master's degree of public policy. We're pleased to have Janet Soto Rodriguez, is an entrepreneurship strategist and part of the innovation and entrepreneurship team at Business Oregon, where she develops and manages statewide partnerships for assistance to entrepreneurs at every stage, and is leading the Rural Opportunity Initiative, which is focused on growing entrepreneurship in rural communities across Oregon. Prior to this role, Janet served as the Economic and Business Equity Policy Advisor to Governor Kate Brown. Next is our own Sandra Slattery, who has been the Executive Director of the ASHLAND Chamber of Commerce since 1985, creating innovative projects that have been used as models by other cities to develop tourism programs, business development projects, and cooperative community relationship. She has served as a member and past president of the Southern Oregon Visitors Association, Southern Oregon University's Regional Advisory Board, SOU President's Advisory Council, and the Ashland Community Hospital Foundation, and as a member of the SOU Foundation. And we're very pleased to have our fourth panelist who made it from Pendleton down here, Todd Davidson. Todd has been involved with the Oregon Tourism Office since 1996. In 2004, with a reworking of that into Travel Oregon, Todd became the CEO of that body. So again, you know the drill. We're going to give each of these folks an opportunity to give a perspective on the economic impact of the smoke and the fire, and then we'll wrap up with some questions. So we'll start with you, Alex.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much to Representative Marsh for inviting our office of Governor Kate Brown to be here. The governor's vision for prosperity for all of Oregon, not just the metro area, I think is very clear and reflected in Business Oregon's strategic plan. I've been involved with her directly in conversations with Oregon Shakespeare Festival and also visits to the Taylor Creek Fire. We're very concerned about, you know, what the immediate impacts and long-term impacts of this new fire environment are, particularly on the Rogue Valley. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some actions that we've taken already, and then also explore some of the directions where what we might do as a community, as a region, to go beyond sort of the immediate reaction to the immediate impacts. I work for the state, but I'm based here in the Rogue Valley and work with our regional economic development partners, including So Ready. Colleen Padilla, their director, was sorry that she couldn't be here today, but I might share with you a little bit of their perspective and some of what they're doing as well. So first, I want to acknowledge, as an economic development professional, I think we often don't acknowledge that we have limited ability. You know, the economy is very large. Economic development is a very small part of it. So I think some of the similarities between the first panel and this panel are interesting. You know, we're going to have to be very strategic and look at where the places are that we can have an effect. And when we think about the overall impact on the Rogue Valley economy, as Bill said, there are multiple impacts of the fire. So there's additional monies that have flowed into the region. When you look at when the work Travel Oregon did on last summer's fire impacts, you saw a lot less impact on lodging and hospitality because there are a lot of federal and other workers coming into these communities to fight the fire. Other operators, other pieces of the economy are hit much more heavily and negatively. And we've got some of the fine-grained detail on that currently on this year, in part because we are reaching out to the Small Business Administration. Hopefully within a couple of weeks, they will have declared that the impact of the fires set off by the July 15th lightning strikes were significant enough that they need to put in place economic disaster lending. And I've talked to a number of businesses that are anxiously awaiting that. They need that. They're sort of 25 to 30% down is what we're hearing from a lot of different businesses, and particularly those with the Taylor Creek fire. The closure of Rogue River to recreation has really severely impacted some of those operators. And as Bill mentioned, you know, the impact here. The impact here to Oregon Shakespeare Festival and the spillover effects on ASHLAND visitation have been really significant. So to immediately address those individual business impacts, we do want to see that disaster lending put in place. The SBDC is our Small Business Development Center network. Those folks are available and are working with businesses to help them both deal with planning and addressing how they move forward and how they might seek financing if that's the right choice for them. Similarly, the state Department of Business and Consumer Services, their insurance folks. We've been putting them in touch, businesses in touch with them as they struggle to deal with whatever insurance coverage they might have that would help them get through situations. Our workforce system has also been reaching out to employers and helping them either remain engaged with their employees if they had to lay them off, or get those folks into the so they're aware of the services that they're available for them. But that's all pretty reactive. And so what are we going to do sort of more thoughtfully about what we can do in the future? The governor appointed a couple of recovery councils last year, one in response to Chetco Bar Fire, one in response to the Gorge Fire. And one of those each developed a number of recommendations, one of which was that we need some funding to support planning projects for communities to address disasters. So we now have the Local Economic Opportunity Fund. I'm sure Sandra and Todd will talk a little bit about some of the market research that we need to do, but we think that there is an opportunity for the state to support research that would help our visitation economy understand how they might adapt, what has been the impact on the sort of viewpoint of their customers. And we've got a number of tools that, as I said, they're fairly small in respect to the shape of the larger economy, but we do have tools to support particular financing, business recruitment, the startup business. I think we've done a very good job of aligning workforce with economic development here in the Rogue Valley, but we also have a number of other tools that we can bring to the table. The Oregon Consensus and Oregon Solutions directors at the National Policy Consensus Center at PSU were actually here just this past week talking about how their support of this collaborative kind of decision making, again, a parallel, excuse me, to that first panel. We've got some structures that we can really support a community as we look at what might be the appropriate medium and long-term response. There are adaptations to the recreation economy, the visitation economy, but there's also what does our overall economic development plan look like in the context where, frankly, we've, I think, been not reliant, is maybe not the right term, but it's been a source of comfort, I think, overall for the economic view for this valley, that the wine industry and other visitation has been sort of a tailwind. And what does it mean if that's less true in the future? And I think appropriately so, Ready is the organization that, or one of the organizations that really needs to be at the heart of that discussion. There are our federal economic development district. There is support from the federal government to think about these kinds of things in a strategic way. So Ready's brought in a really first class team, or looking at a group called TIP out of Austin and Seattle to help us think about what are those strategic initiatives, what are additional competitive advantages that we want to leverage going forward. And a few things in that area. Janet's going to talk about entrepreneurship. We already have, I think, a real strength in terms of the angel investment community here that's been brought together. There's software development. There's a company here in ASHLAND that we've been working with lately that's talking about really significant expansion. I think we've really only scratched the surface on ways we might be able to leverage this institution, SOU, to support that kind of diversification and support of new and emerging industries. And finally, at the base, though, any activity, any strategy is, we do need an attractive region. We do need a good place to live, not just for the economy, but for fulfilling lives for all of us. So, we are ready to play our part in the conversation that the first panel was talking about, and what it is that we need to do in changing our forest management. Again, I think that is an economic development issue. And just to touch a little bit more on that, the first panel suggested there are some economic opportunities that could come from that, right? We have been having less economic activity in our forest over the last couple decades rather than previously, and a reversal of that could be a real positive driver. And I think we're also very lucky to have the mill infrastructure that we do. That's going to be an important part of what that solution is, and so we've got some really. We're fortunate to still have those assets the way a lot of regions in the West don't. So I look forward to, I think we've got an opportunity to recommit and work with some more intentionality in the future about, as a community, as what our economic future looks like. Thank you.
All right. So as Bill mentioned, I am part of the innovation and entrepreneurship team at Business Oregon, and I'm spearheading our Rural Opportunity Initiative. And just to give you a little bit of more clarity, it is a grant that is meant to infuse dollars in local communities, in local initiatives, to increase the amount of entrepreneurs and small businesses in the community. And to Alex's point, it really focuses on diversification. How can we look at who we are, look at our strengths, look at our assets, and then rethink ourselves, think outside the box, color outside the lines, and completely say, what are we not looking at? What are we not thinking about? And really infusing ourselves with innovation and thinking about different industries. So outside of OSF and outside of tourism, what else can we do? Because innovation and technology means that we can really be whoever we want to be. And so the initiative focuses on that. But before I get too deep into this, and Representative Marsh invited me here today to talk about the work I'm doing with other rural communities, just to give you an example of what some of these creative out-of-the-box strategies could look like for you, I want to introduce somebody in the audience that's really important. She is your local regional development officer for Business Oregon. So whereas I cover the entire state, you have somebody here locally who's dedicated to you, and anything that I mentioned today, any resources, a lot of what Alex talked about, a lot of those on-the-ground programs and initiatives and dollars are actually run out of our agency. And so if you want information on any of that, Marta in the audience is a great person. So can you stand up? So remember her, find her, get her card, make sure that you all are in contact. And she'll help me answer questions after this, I'm sure. So a little bit about the grant, a little bit about how it's designed, just so that you understand. We really focus on what is a local challenge. I think in this room we all are here because we've identified the challenge. And then we really look at what are some grassroots and community organizing activities to really galvanize the community around a shared purpose. What you are doing here today is already a phenomenal first step. I had no idea how many people were going to show up today, and that this many people are here trying to identify what comes next is already a tremendous asset. Then we also look at what are some flexible and adaptable strategies, and how do we infuse that with marketing specialists, facilitators, direct grant writing, and we really couple this initiative with a lot of hands-on support and coaching. And I get to be really lucky and wake up and travel all over Oregon and be the coach to a number of communities. And so I always wonder, how did I get so lucky? And how do I wake up and get to do this every day? I've been in Coos Bay, in Medford, Central Point, Klamath Falls this week alone, and next week I'm headed over to Harney County. And the theme is for me that my purpose and what makes me wake up every day is that I've seen hard economic times. I grew up in a small, remote village in the mountains, no running water, no electricity, certainly no connectivity, no roads, and I saw firsthand what the power of community and grassroots organizing can do to change a community, to redesign who you are, to change the way people think about you, and to say we have a lot more to offer. And so Business Oregon gave me the chance to design something that is really meant for communities to raise their hand and say, we want to think about who else we can be too. So from isolation, lack of resources, stripping down to the bare essentials, you really have an opportunity to discover who you are. And ASHLAND, not to mitigate the summer that you have had or the last 2 or 3 years, because it's been hard. And I'm telling you, I've been the last 24 hours walking around just talking to strangers, and a lot of people are like looking at me like, why are you asking me these questions? And I just wanted to check in with local folks and see how they're feeling. And it's heavy. And everyone is talking about it. It didn't matter who I talked to, they had an opinion. And sometimes I sat for way longer than I anticipated listening to somebody. And the truth is that despite this onset of literal darkness, you all have a tremendous amount of assets, a tremendous amount of strength, and a tremendous amount of local pride. And this room is evidence of that in and of itself, and we can build on this. When I go to communities, sometimes I go into a room and there's 3 people, and I'm like, we can still build on this. And so what you all have here, we can really build on this. So with that said, you all have a challenge, you have a shared purpose, and as Belle said from the last panel, we're in this together. So at Rep. Marsh's request, I'm just gonna go through and share with you some of the things I've seen this week alone, and I'm happy to go over a number of other strategies, but these are just offered to give you some context of how you can think outside the box. So earlier this week, I was in Coos Bay, and I said, all right, what's your challenge? And they said, we have identified 3: workforce, lack of affordable childcare, and housing. All right, and then they actually had somebody come in, one of our facilitators through this grant, who discovered that Coos Bay is a childcare desert, and that they actually have 12 slots for every 100 children that need one. So huge, huge issue. And I had the Small Business Development Center, local chambers, like all these business support groups, and they're saying, well, we don't do childcare, and well, how do we tackle this problem? And they went around and they really ultimately got 18 major partners. They identified 1 champion in the community college. The community college had an abandoned building that DHS recently left. They had close to $2 million in money that they had from being under budget from refurbishing their health sciences building, which was, I mean, talk about like an opportunity. And they got these 18 partners, and similar to what Mark Webb said from the first forestry panel, sometimes these are groups of people who couldn't stand each other. They also had the 2 tribes in the room, and they got all 18 partners to pool their money, pool their resources, share their strategic plans. This didn't happen overnight. I've been working there for 2 years. So they got them all to come together, and now they have, close to $3 million in pooled resources, an empty building, everybody co-locating. They've identified their shared challenges. They have a shared purpose, and now they're so energized, and the community is so inspired. And this is a community that's been hit for a very long time. And they're saying, we're gonna build the first childcare incubator in the United States. In Coos Bay. Right? Like, whoa. And they have the resources to do it, and they have the expertise, and they have the community college, so they're gonna put their business school to work there, their culinary school to provide food, the childcare and human development and education branches of education. They also have their adult workforce co-located in this building, as well as all the small business coaching services, their chamber, their economic development district, their small business development centers, and the 2 tribes, all in one building, all because they know that these are their 3 biggest challenges, and they've had enough, and they want to shock the world. They want to become, it will be the 2nd childcare incubator. The first one is in Australia, and they're saying we can do it in Coos Bay, and they have the momentum to do it. So that's one where you think about challenge and shared purpose. Another one is Klamath Falls. I'll run through this one really quick too. They wanted to keep graduates, diversify their economy, and they said, what is our biggest untapped resource? And how do we address keeping young people here? Oh, our young people. Why don't we ask our young people? So they put the power in the hands of young people. They actually created a challenge called Innovation Close to Home, and these young people were like, whoa, you trust us. We're gonna go out and do this. They went out and met with farmers. They addressed barley as an economy that's been falling for the last 20 years. And after one summer of working with farmers, these young people created a 85% return on their investment. They addressed growing challenges, harvesting challenging, and storing challenges. And I was thinking about what Jackson said about the breath masks or the respirators. I was like, that sounds like a really inefficient thing that exists. And in Klamath Falls, these young people identified 8 new inventions to address some of the region's biggest problems related to harvesting, bees, pollination, and the community was like, oh my God, all we had to do was give them a sandbox, let them break things, let them play. What if you told young people here that they need to come up with the next new respirator? They would probably be all over that, and I bet that you could get it after 1 or 2 summers in the same way that Klamath Falls. They've been doing that now for 5 years, and the winning team from their competition has graduated, has stayed in Klamath Falls, and all of them have opened a local business. So it's working. I'm being booted out of here. So the last thing I'll say is that you all have a lot of momentum, a lot of energy. You all know what your challenge is. You all can galvanize around a lot of support. You have underutilized assets. You have young people. You can look at new industries. You can do pop-up maker spaces, pop-up robotic competitions. I'm doing this right now in 18 communities across Oregon. And there are some where they're like, the chamber was like, we can't get anybody to come out to anything. And at the end of the day, after working with them for 3 months, they had a room, not this full, but it was 40, 50 people. Same thing in Klamath Falls. Just 2 days ago, close to 200 people in a room, and they were talking for the first time about guns, sexuality, religion, things that they weren't willing to talk about, but it was because they tapped into all their underutilized resources and are rethinking who they are. So you all have a really tremendous space here, and you can do amazing work here too.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Pam, for organizing this summit and for your concern on this complex and very challenging issue. And it's my pleasure to share with you some ongoing programs and collaborative relationships that we've developed at the ASHLAND Chamber and we continue to grow. And I really appreciate the question. How do we build resilience in a business environment that is facing ongoing smoke and fire concerns? First, it's a question that's based in a practical approach, assuming we will continue to have smoke and fire that affect our communities and that we have the capacity to do something about it. And while that might seem obvious, I think a normal reaction to the situation that we've all experienced is, I sure hope that doesn't happen again, or phew, we're through the worst of it. Let's just not worry too much about the future. But we know that's not a good idea, and we prefer a positive, proactive approach. So we've asked ourselves, what do we have control over? And what do we not have control over? Where can we find information? And how do we distribute it? How can we collaborate? And who should we collaborate with? And where can we then turn to work on long-term solutions to the problem? The ASHLAND Chamber has a fire prevention task force, and this is in collaboration with the City of Ashland's Ashland Fire and Rescue. And it includes members of Allison Lurch and Chris Chambers over on the wall. Say hi. It includes the Wildfire Mitigation Commission of the city, the Chamber Board, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the County Health Department, thank you, Jackson, and Asante, Ashland Community Hospital. And our purpose has been to work on issues of fire and smoke in our community, as well as emergency preparedness. And this has included sponsorship of community forums, films, lectures, and printed materials to better educate our community on fire and smoke. 2 different community events we helped sponsor with Paul Hesburgh on the era of mega fires. And some of you may have attended that. Raise your hand if you went to any of those. They're fantastic. Whenever you have the opportunity to hear Paul Hesburgh speak, please do that. We realized after the smoke of last summer and the negative impact we had to our business community in our region, that our task force had a job ahead of it. And so we met last fall, and we decided we needed to help our businesses mitigate the possibility of smoke in the future. We certainly didn't anticipate the kind of summer we ended up having this year and the severe economic impacts that we've experienced regionally. What we did when we got together is we found out there was really a lack of resources. And you think, well, there's resources everywhere. But if you recall, it was really difficult to know where to go, where to find answers. And so we didn't even really understand that. We looked at the DEQ chart and said, well, what exactly does that mean? Unhealthy for sensitive groups. Who's sensitive? Who isn't? And what happens over prolonged exposure? What does that all mean? And we also said, how can we improve our indoor environments? If, like the previous panelists have said, our health professionals, you need to stay indoors. Well, what is indoors? How do we know it's healthy indoors? So we did a lot of research, and really thanks to the work of our ASHLAND Fire and Rescue and Allison and Chris, tremendous amount of data that we were able to uncover. And we learned things that we never really knew about before. We learned about MERV 13 air filters and air scrubbers and air cleaners. The difference, what's an air curtain? What does all this mean? And how can we look at those particular equipment improvements in our businesses to improve the indoor air quality? And this was important. It was important for our employees who work day in and day out, and certainly for the customers, people who come into those businesses, to feel that it's a safe environment. We created, and we said, all right, we need to educate people, so we put on a workshop, like we all do, and in February we had a terrific turnout, and we did a workshop all on smoke awareness. We had representation from Southern Oregon University, the school district, the YMCA, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and a number of small businesses. And in that, we also created videos, and we had how to wear a mask. Again, recognizing we didn't really know that we were doing it wrong, and what kind of equipment, what kind of filters, et cetera. And then after the workshop, we took all of that information, created a second set of videos so people could go directly and watch them if they couldn't go to the workshop themselves. We were really happy to have the support of the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service with a perfect grant that we were able to also make that all happen. We updated our website. ASHLAND Fire and Rescue updated theirs. We put all these videos and materials and articles all about smoke and fire. And then we said, you know what, let's combine those and let's create one website. And that's how we developed smokewiseashland.org. Just last week, Allison shared with us in July alone, that website had 17,000 hits. And that was in July. So we know that it was very well used. One of the things that we did was, during our workshop, we created this smoke preparedness guide. And basically, it's a needs analysis for someone to take a look at their physical plant, what does it currently look like, and look at their employees who could come to work in a severe smoke situation and who couldn't, and what do their customers look like? Could they continue to do business or not? Additionally, we provided information on specific air cleaners, air filters, et cetera, and also some strategies around a communication plan. So if we did get in a situation, they would know what to do. We were very happy that Southern Oregon University took the recommendations and made changes and improved the air quality of some of their buildings. And then when we had the situation, of course, they were able to open some of their facilities to the community, which was terrific. The school district also took our recommendations, implemented changes, and then in the situation that we had with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, they were able to collaborate with them and utilize the theater. While not ideal, it certainly provided a wonderful resource, and thanks to our school district for doing that. Our YMCA, again, it made improvements to their air quality inside, so that was terrific. We took that information and we realized everything we'd done for business owners was scalable. And certainly citizens could look at their own homes in the same way. And so we continued to update the website, and with the work of the ASHLAND Fire and Rescue, provided that as a resource so citizens could say, you know, I can buy an air cleaner for my home. It's portable, and I can feel assured that if I do have to stay indoors, that the air inside is clean. We all learned that we also need to take a look at all of our systems internally and our filters, such as the MERV 13. We've been promoting the use of this site all over throughout the summer. We have emailed our community partners who've shared it. Asante shared it with every one of their employees, including physicians who are sharing information with their patients. SOU shared it with all of their employees, and we're really pushing out education information. We've looked at our smoke resources and communication and provided updates within all of our materials for our visitors and people who live here. I was able to speak on, Pam had invited us to speak at the Oregon State Capitol to the Economic Development and Trade Committee to share with them what we've done here, because we want to share it with anyone who wants to use it. The state of Washington has taken our information and they're using it. Other communities are using it across the country through the work that Allison does with fire-adapted communities. We very much support the work of the Rogue Basin Strategy, bringing community leaders in the entire region together to work on smoke mitigation, to talk about what successes we've had and how we can, and the need for strong partnerships in our region. We are working with our local, regional, and state partners and tourism entities such as Travel Southern Oregon and Travel Oregon, our businesses, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and we're taking a look at seasonal shifts in business and what would that look like. As Alex mentioned, we're continuing to meet on how do we research our current visitor base to look for seasonal opportunities, and how do we collaborate on a regional sharing of data, visitor promotions, and communications, and what could that look like that's different than it has in the past. We need to share the same message of care for our environment, stories of those who have worked to mitigate smoke, efforts to manage our forests, and improve fire danger. And why this is still a really great place to live and do business. We all need to own the problem, work collaboratively on finding solutions, and we're finding success by doing that, and we can find more success, and we need to. After all, we're breathing in the same air. Let's recognize we need to breathe out workable solutions. Thank you.
All right. Well, I guess I'll say good afternoon. I can see the clock, and it's just a little after 12, so I'll say good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Davidson, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the CEO of Travel Oregon, and I feel like I'm kind of chasing Janet around the state lately. I was Pacific City on Tuesday, it was Pendleton Wednesday and Thursday, and it's Ashland Friday and Saturday, and that's important. Because as Janet expressed, it's incredibly invaluable for us to be able to be meeting with folks across the state and hearing firsthand what the challenges are and also what the opportunities are as well. I want to personally thank Representative Marsh for bringing us all together here for this very timely summit. This is a situation, as we all know, and has been expressed, I think, very, very well by the first panel, that is not going to pivot overnight. And so resiliency and adaptation are obviously the two key themes that I'm hearing resonate throughout this day. The other thing I want to be sure I point out is that as I leave from Ashland, you've got great resources here. First and foremost, you've already heard from Sandra. So for those of you that are here in Ashland, you know the amazing work that they're doing. I also want to call out Brad Niva, who is the Executive Director of the Travel Southern Oregon organization, our partner here on the regional level. Brad, if you would stand, I'm going to call you out, just so people know who you are. But this is a gentleman that we work with, he and his organization at Travel Southern Oregon, that we work with very closely on these wildfire communication issues, but also marketing and tourism development issues as well. As Travel Oregon, we're involved on the preventative side, the during the wildfire side, and the recovery side. And I want to just go through a few of the initiatives very quickly, because I've put a sheet, a one-pager back over here on this first table by the door that's called Resources for the Travel and Tourism Industry that highlight far more all the various tools in the toolkit that are available for you. So let me start there. One that touches all of them is this wildfire toolkit that we've pulled together. It's a web page that contains our industry partners and stakeholders with all the wildfire resources that we believe that they will need, including the wildfire economic impact study that we did last year that was able to estimate that there was about a $51 million economic impact to the state's tourism industry as a result of the wildfires that occurred last year. That information is available on our industry website, which is industry.traveloregon.com. And again, that website's on that resource page that I mentioned earlier. Secondly, I'd like to mention that this coordination with our partners, I mentioned Brad, I mentioned the work with Sandra. You know, we're involved in a number of coordination calls with a variety of partners to make sure that tourism industry impacts are being evaluated and being communicated across multiple platforms. This includes the work that we're doing with the Western States Tourism Recovery Coalition. In other words, we're working with our partners in California and Washington to make sure our visitors are getting firsthand information about what's happening in each of the states up and down the West Coast, because that tends to be how they're inclined to travel. We're also involved in a natural disaster marketing co-op. But this is where Travel Oregon has brought some money to the table to match dollars that are brought forward from regional destination marketing organizations like Brad's work with Travel Southern Oregon. I'm very proud to tell you that Travel Southern Oregon was the first one to raise their hand and get to the table and say, we need to do something. And we've got about a $50,000 marketing co-op in the works to get in place this fall. And the fourth is, I just want to mention that we have just recently completed a wildfire video. We put together a video to provide some context and background on wildfires in Oregon, to clarify misconceptions about wildfires in general, and to make sure we're providing visitors with a call to action to visit these communities that have been impacted by wildfires once the wildfires have subsided. So with that, I will conclude and turn it back over to you, Bill, to open it up for the panel for questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Great. Thanks, Todd. We want to honor the commitment that we made as to how this conference was scheduled for today. And so we're going to forego the questions to the panel at this point, and I hope that many of you, if you have questions specific to this area, can stick around afterwards. But we do have one more panel, and it's on climate mitigation and adaptation. And we have two great panelists and Sean to introduce that. So I think, again, Pam, if it's okay with you, we're going to just transition directly to our last two panelists and our moderator before you wrap up this great morning. And so let's thank them.
So we'd ask you to stay in your seats. If you need to stretch and stand, please do that. And we'll make a quick transition here because we have one fabulous panel remaining. So now we're back to the beginning of the day. And if you remember that Medford Mail Tribune headline up there, we are impacted by climate change. There is no reason to think that that's not going to get worse in the coming years. And it's absolutely an exacerbating element in the kind of fire seasons that we are experiencing. I think every panel has referred to climate change in one way or another. It's no longer a debate, it's a fact, and we have to figure out what we can do about it. So our final panel will bring us home, and I think what you will hear today is not only a lot of information about climate change, but also the ways in which some of our climate solutions can also serve in a very reinforcing way to address the forest issues that we heard back about on the first panel. So I'm going to introduce Sean Franks. He is a 2014 graduate of Southern Oregon University, where he studied business, environmental studies, and corporate sustainability. He works for True South Solar, which is a leading local team of designers and installers working in residential and commercial solar power systems. He currently serves on the board of Rogue Climate, the McKinsey River Gathering Foundation Grant Making Committee, and the SOU Board of Trustees. Sean.
Thank you all for being here this morning. How exciting to kind of get to learn with my community. Live in the sunshine, swim in the sea, drink in the wild air. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Climate, the weather conditions prevailing in an area in general over a long period is changing. Our summers have not been and will not be the summers of our youth. Our fires are burning hotter, faster, and twice as large over the last 30 years. The problem is human-caused and will take long-term solutions from us coming together. Imagine with me for just a moment the childhood, just the summers of your childhood. What did you do? Where did you go? How much fun did you have? And who were you with? Summer vacation as a child for me meant playing outside, enjoying what the environment had to offer, no school, sleeping outside, playing with friends, catching fish, and breathing deep. I remember growing up, my mother would often say, "Why don't you go play outside and don't come back for a little while?" I'm a father to two wonderful boys now, Carter and Micah. They're 5 and 8 years old, and this summer, like many of us, spent most of their summers indoors. They were constantly told, "You can't play outside, it's too smoky." And when all of us check the air quality index, hopefully on our apps, or now you know which app to utilize, the air quality index too is telling us essentially, you can't play outside, it's too smoky. Our climate is changing and it is having real consequences for our communities. In Arizona, this looks like heat waves. In North and South Carolina, hurricanes and extreme flooding. Right here in Oregon and California, we're looking at water shortages, economic losses, hotter summers, massive fires, and more smoke. These fires, along with the smoke, are undoubtedly changing the way we live in Southern Oregon, and it's hard to imagine these fires getting any worse, but the science is telling us it will. We are here on a Saturday because these fires and smokes are having an actual impact on our lives, and that's pretty scary. And in the face of this, we are here because we care about our community, our future, and our climate. We are coming together to figure out what are the responsible, long-term actions that we need to take to protect our families, our neighbors, and our communities. Despite this new reality, I still have a lot of hope that there are real actions we can take to get back on track. We can keep 80% of the fossil fuels in the ground, we can transition to 100% renewable energy, and we can sequester greenhouse gases in our forests and farms. Easy, right? But by acting now, we can make our communities stronger. We can create good jobs in clean energy and forest restoration, and we can protect our quality of life here in Southern Oregon. With that, I'd like to introduce Bill Bradbury. Bill Bradbury has served as an Oregon representative to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, Oregon Secretary of State, and State Senator. As the director for the sake of the salmon, he worked collaboratively with the Northwest Native American tribes, federal, state, and local governments, as well as timber, agriculture, and fishing interests. Bill was one of the first 50 people trained by former Vice President Al Gore to give climate presentations in 2006, and he has delivered over 500 presentations across the state. Please join me in welcoming Bill Bradbury.
So let me put this on here if I could. Thank you. So thank you. It's a real, it's a real pleasure to be here. Mostly. Thank you so much. I wanted to start this presentation by having everyone look at the screen and look at the change in temperatures. This is all over the world. And the United States is at the bottom center. And watch as time goes on and as it gets redder and redder, you start to realize that, oh, the climate does appear to be changing. And it's particularly striking as you go into the 2000s. And it's just
that's the whole world. It's not just Southern Oregon, not just Oregon, that's the whole world. Oregon right now, or not Oregon, Oregon's a little hotter, but the United States is now 1.5 degrees hotter than it was in 1880. So clearly we're seeing a dramatic increase in surface temperature. And 17 of the 18 hottest years on record occurred since the year 2001. The 4 hottest years on record are, in fact, the last 4. The last 4 years, this year and the last 4 years, or not, the last 4 years are the 4 hottest on record. Seoul, Korea, 2018. They had the hottest day really in history in Korea, 105, over 105 degrees. In Algeria, they had really a new all-time heat record for Africa, 124 degrees. Sorry, I'm trying, there we go. Pakistan, it's basically, they were 122 degrees on April of this year. In Montreal, Canada, which is a place you normally think of as kind of cool, they had 90 people die actually in Quebec in July this year because they had a heat wave and the ambulances were overwhelmed. And in Karachi, Pakistan, 90 people died in mid-May as a result of temperatures in Karachi that rose above 109 degrees. So you're seeing real impacts. And you're seeing it all over the world. Worldwide weather impacts us, whether it be extreme temperatures, droughts and fires in red, floods and mudslides in blue, or storms, hurricanes, for example, typhoons, for example, in yellow. That brings us right here to now. August of this year, we had in 2018 859 fires throughout the state of Oregon. 70,000 acres burned so far. We're seeing it all over the country. Durango, Colorado, the 416 fire burned over 33,000 acres. The Buzzard fire burned over 50,000 acres in New Mexico. And it's not really a big surprise, but hotter years typically have more fires. You can see here from this chart, as the temperature goes up, the fires increase. That's looking at the last 45 years. The fire season in the U.S. West is now 105 days longer than it was in 1970. Obviously, we had a serious wildfires in Northern California and in Southern Oregon. The U.S. Drought Monitor for Oregon showed that it was 100% abnormally dry throughout the state. 84% of the state has been suffering from severe drought. And this is just some aerials of the fires, and this is what it looked like. And I'm sure you all remember there were over 2,000 firefighters fighting the fires. And not surprisingly, the water supply in the Rogue and Umpqua basins was 76% of normal this year. And in Oregon, the average, 10-year average for the number of acres that are burned is about 33,000 acres. In 2018, we had 71,000 acres burned. So we are twice the 10-year average in terms of burning. So that's true all over this country. You can see wildfires consuming more U.S. land. If you look from 1983 to the present, it's basically way more than doubled the amount of land that's being burned by wildfires. So it's not surprising, as temperatures increase, you see more and more moisture being evaporated into the sky, and warmer air can hold a lot more water vapor. And with each additional 1 degree centigrade of temperature, the atmosphere's capacity to hold water vapor increases by 7%. So more water is held in the sky. There's already 5% more water vapor over the ocean than there was only 30 years ago. So what does that mean? Well, in addition to drying, what it means is we get downpours getting bigger and bigger. This is a rain bomb in Montana in 2010. This is in Wichita, Kansas this year. And this is Phoenix, Arizona in 2016. And watch the water fall out of the sky in this 2015 photograph of a rain bomb in Phoenix, or in Tucson. Just lands on there, just lands. It's just phenomenal. There's just huge amounts of water coming out of the sky. So globally, floods and extreme rainfall now occur 4 times more often than in 1980. And basically, all over the country, Quincy, Massachusetts, Rockford, Illinois, Ellicott City, Maryland, Louisville, Kentucky, in France, and Somalia, and Kenya. 150 people died in Kenya, and 222,000 have been displaced since March by torrential rains, flooding, and a burst dam. This is Sichuan province in China, and a whole bunch of people were killed by flooding in China this year. And that's what it looks like, just studying and looking at all the floodwater. So pretty incredible. This was in Japan, and about 200 people were killed by flooding in this part of Japan. You just get to wait on your roof till you get rescued. And basically, some parts of Japan received 40 inches of rain in 48 hours. 40 inches of rain in 48 hours. This is a picture of Hiroshima, Japan. We can all remember Hiroshima from World War II. They suffered from a rain bomb this time. It's pretty remarkable. And there are other events. In Argentina, a rain bomb delivered about 4.9, almost 5 feet of hail in Argentina. So I want to just emphasize that the same water that evaporates more water from the ocean, causing bigger downpours and floods, that water also pulls more moisture even more quickly from the soil, causing longer droughts and fires. This is in South Africa. This is a water reservoir there. They're not doing too well. This is in Zimbabwe, trying to get some water out of a well. And this is in China. And this used to be water. This used to be a river. You can see the bridge, but it's not there anymore. And we all remember the fires in Greece. 91 people were killed in fires near Athens. I actually just love this photograph. It's a photograph of a fire in England with the full moon rising behind it. But the point is, whether it be Croatia or France or Italy or in Portugal, people died in wildfires that had a dramatic effect. and it's all the way to India as well. So I think all of you living here are familiar with this picture. We all know that that's what you see, fires, and you also see smoke. And this is kind of what we're learning to live with, is this kind of smoke. And it has a dramatic impact, and clearly there is a cost to everything we're doing, whether it be the political instability or the droughts or the storm damage, et cetera. All these things have a real impact on our life here. And so it's really, the cost of carbon in the atmosphere is really the #1 threat to the global economy, and it's a challenge for all of us to live through it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. Now I'd like to introduce Keola Swanson. Keola Swanson is Oregon Program Director for Pacific Forest Trust, a forest conservation and land trust organization that works in partnership with private landowners, communities, and government agencies to sustain forests for their many public benefits. Her recent work as Conservation Programs Director for the Freshwater Trust was focused on developing investment strategies and systems to increase the pace and scale of freshwater conservation. Keola holds a master's degree in environmental management. Keola Swanson.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. This has been an incredible morning, and I'm really pleased to be part of this conversation on behalf of Pacific Forest Trust. That was an incredible presentation, Bill. Thank you for that. As have all of the panelists today. They've all been great presentations, and some of these problems can feel, I mean, this is a huge problem, and it can feel very hard to do anything about it. But I hope that I can offer a little bit of optimism with a solution that we can apply locally, that we are applying locally here in Oregon and in California and in Washington, but that could certainly be expanded to many other parts of the country and the world. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about the Pacific Forest Trust. We are a nonprofit. We are based in California, but as I just said, we work across the West Coast. And we're really focused on protecting forests for all of the benefits that they provide, both for the economic benefits and for the benefits to wildlife, water, and the climate, specifically in this context. So we've been around for about more than 25 years, and we've protected more than 265,000 acres of forest land. And we'd like to see more of that. And so we're also engaged in policy conversations to try to find ways to drive more revenue and more funding toward natural and working lands and forests in particular. And the reason that we want to do that is that forests, globally, forest loss and degradation is the second largest source of carbon dioxide emissions. However, forests also have the potential to sequester far more than they emit, so they're really an opportunity for us and a reason to have some optimism and hope as we move forward. And there's three things, very simple, that we want to see with forest land. We want to reduce forest loss in general. We want to stop it from happening in the first place. We want to increase the resiliency of our current forests to bring them back to their natural states and to increase their health and complexity. And then we also, we want to reforest areas that were historically forested that may be converted or that maybe are so degraded that they're really not functioning as forests anymore. So pretty simple solutions if you kind of boil it down that way. And we think that we have some tools and some ideas about how we might do this. And one is called a working forest conservation easement. And so that's what I'll be talking about primarily today. And I'll go into detail about that a little bit more. In general, a working forest conservation easement accomplishes two of these big goals, which is keeping forests as forests and increasing the carbon richness of forests, so sequestering more carbon. It also has additional benefits of increasing climate resiliency and fire resiliency. So I'll just, I guess, jump into what a working forest conservation easement might look like on the ground. It's important to note that working forest easements are still in forestry. They are still being timbered, they're still being logged. But we're also working with public and private investments to leverage those private landowners' lands so that we are seeing the public benefits increasingly generated. So Pacific Forest Trust really works with private forest owners, whether they are individual landowners or large timber investment management companies, just that whole spectrum. And public lands do this work as well. We heard about that earlier today. So this is a tool sort of in that sweet spot in the middle. And it's very cost-effective investment we can make. It generates rural jobs. It also benefits the climate and is good for the habitat. So what is an easement? Might be a question that you have. An easement is pretty simply just a legally binding agreement not to do something on your land. And when we're talking about conservation easements, they're usually used to protect land from being converted or from being subdivided. And if you're looking at forest land, we add another layer to that where a working forest easement also says, let's manage this land in consistency with certain values. And those values are going to be described by the landowner. Every property is different. All the outcomes are, we're always working for outcomes that are beneficial for wildlife and for climate and for water, but how you prioritize those actions and exactly where on your property you're going to do that is going to change over time because easements are, they're permanent. They travel with the land no matter who owns it. Once an easement is in place, it's forever. So you're going to have to manage that adaptively over time for those same outcomes. But that's what we do, and I'd like to give you a couple of examples just here at home that might be of interest to you. The first is actually just down the road. I'm not sure if Judd Parsons is here in the room or if any of you know him, but he's a member of your community, and this property is just and he's a fantastic member of your community, I should say. He's an incredible guy if you haven't met him. And his property is also very unique, both for its location and because of where you all are in general. So his property is in between land that's managed by the Forest Service and land that's managed by the BLM, making it a pretty important piece of connectivity. It's also in an area, you guys have some of the most incredible biodiversity in the world. You have so many rare and endangered species, Pacific fishers, you have the northern spotted owl, coho salmon. This property is also at the headwaters of Neal Creek. So lots of reasons that we thought working with Judd would be an incredible opportunity. And Judd has already been managing this land for more than 100 years. His family has been managing this property, and he wants to see that management continue. He has values in place that he wants to protect, water, wildlife. He's managing for fire risk reduction. There's a very steep slope where he's managing primarily to prevent any fire moving across the crest, because that would be devastating if it were to occur. He's also got areas where he's managing primarily for economic return, and we wanted to help him protect this legacy moving forward. Also, because it's really valuable for the climate. He has a very healthy forest. It's a very diverse forest. There's a multi-storied canopy. He has different habitat areas. He has oak regeneration, and he has a wet meadow. Lots of things that are happening there that are good for preventing carbon loss in the first place, and also for the net carbon on the ground and in the wood products when he's harvesting. That's still carbon sequestration. It's only about a third as effective as a standing tree, but that's something that is a renewable resource that we can see a lot more of moving forward. Judd's property is also a really interesting example of funding streams, because we worked with him and with Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, the U.S. Forest Service, as well as the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to fund this conservation easement. So it's a nice way to see how public and private dollars can be leveraged, and also to just take this opportunity to say that funding these things is not easy, and there are not very many opportunities in this state to do that. So moving down the road, we could take a little bit of a lesson from our neighbors in California, where the climate legislation has really led to a lot of funding for forest health and forest conservation. And so that's something that we think moving forward in Oregon, a climate bill would help us to see more of. So this property is a little bit farther down I-5 in between the cities of Mount Shasta City and Weed, California. And those are both growing cities, a lot of incredible outdoor recreation, a lot of potential fire risk. So we worked with a company called Michigan California Timber Company to look at how they might move 5,000 of their 40,000 acres into more heterogeneous complex forest management. They typically have even-aged trees that are much more dense, like a lot of what we heard about earlier today, and they're interested in seeing what they could do and what kinds of practices would help them move into a more, multi-story diverse canopy. And this property, we haven't actually finalized this easement. This is something that is in process, but I think it's a really exciting one because it's entirely funded by money, as I said, from the sale of greenhouse gas allowances or permits in the state of California. So the scale of this is pretty significant. Working with this company is pretty significant, and we think, it's a really great step forward that we'd like to see more of in California and in Oregon. It's also a place where, again, we're still doing logging, we're still selling wood products, and we're seeing a lot more carbon richness and a lot more species diversity moving forward. So really a win-win, and we think it's a pretty versatile tool. This is I wanted to reemphasize the versatility of this tool with this slide, but this is also a property that we work on in Lincoln County, Oregon, called the Van Eck Forest, and it's really under natural forest management, which is a slightly different approach. But all of these represent sort of a spectrum of land ownership and different outcomes that people want to see, different kinds of approaches, but it's fairly simple. Forests have an enormous opportunity to sequester carbon. Oregon is more than 1/3 forest land. We should take this opportunity to really lead our country and globally in addressing climate change, and also with that bringing more resiliency to fire, which I think is something everyone in this room is very interested to see. I didn't have a lot of time today, but if you'd like to talk more, this is my email address, and I left some pamphlets over on the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keola. Thank you all for joining us today. This was absolutely not the end of the conversation. As you can see, we haven't solved the issue quite yet, but I think us being together as a community is really a great starting point. So thank you all for your engagement and your future action.
Just a couple of other comments. First, again, thanks to the phenomenal panelists and moderators that we had here today. Tremendous conversation. Again, the link to the videoed presentation will be on my Facebook page, Rep. Pam Marsh. If you can't find it, get in touch with me, and I will make sure that you have it. It will also be shown at times to be announced on RVTV for those of you who received that. It was an incredible 3 hours, but of course in 3 hours we can't cover everything, and it's clear there will be many opportunities in the months to come for more discussion, more thinking on all of this. I'm already thinking about a town hall presentation with the state fire marshal to get him to come down here and talk about how we use data to predict fire and to organize the resources around that. So stay tuned. We're going to be putting that together in the next couple of months as soon as he can get away from fire season. But I do have two requests. One is if you would like to be informed of future events, please leave us your email on those sign-in sheets. You may have signed in when you came in. If you did, you're already taken care of. If not, and you'd like to be informed, please sign up. We won't use your email for anything else, I promise. And secondly, we have a feedback form that's over on the back table. Paige has got it. No requirement to fill it out, but if you have suggestions for future forums or comments on our time here this morning, please leave those on that form. We may be in touch with you over email to offer you the chance to do that as well in the coming weeks. And finally, take a few minutes. We have this room till 1 o'clock. There's some great resources around the room. Have the opportunity to share with each other. Nature Conservancy is doing a fire history tour at 2 o'clock this afternoon. If anybody's still got energy after sitting in this room with us for 3 hours, you can see them in the back. And again, my heartfelt thanks to all of you for coming today. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. I was hoping to meet you before, but nice to meet you now. That was an amazing presentation that you just gave. Yeah. It was like, I don't have anything to say after that. It feels terrific job. No, it was great. Great event. Nice to meet you. Walked it. It's really good. Oh, good. Okay. Good. I hope it was helpful. Oh, thank you so much. Really glad to be here. Yeah. Hey. Hey. Yeah, nice to see you.